After my husband's funeral, the house we'd lived in suddenly felt so empty it was bone cold. I thought if my only son moved back in, maybe neither of us would be so lonely. I sold the lakeside lot, gave him the money to start a business, and kept only the first floor for myself. I believed that was an act of motherly love. I didn't know it was the start of a long nightmare. One morning, my son set a paper on the table, his voice flat like a business call. $4,000 a month, Mom. If you want to stay, sign here. I thought I'd misheard. I'd given him this house. He just shrugged. It's mine now. Whoever lives here pays. I swallowed it, telling myself he was stuck and needed time. Until that night when I broke an old plate, my son slammed the table and shouted, "You broke the most expensive set! You should learn to pay for every mistake!" I bent down to pick up the porcelain shards, my hand bleeding, then quietly set an envelope with $4,000 on the table. "Here's the price. I pay for giving birth to you," I whispered. That night I left, carrying a legal secret he didn't know. I still held title to the land. And soon, the day he learned, that would be the day he understood what it really means to pay. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Nora Whitman, 65, a widow after more than 40 years of marriage. My husband Harold died of a sudden heart attack early last fall. On the day of the funeral, Ethan gripped my hand and said he would never let his mother live alone. I believed him. I believed it so much that I cleared out Harold's room, wiped every frame, and prepared the small attic for Ethan and his wife, Marissa, to move in. At first, the house was full of laughter. Marissa cooked. Ethan helped me fix the front steps. I thought maybe I still had a family, but just 2 months later, everything changed. Ethan quit his old job, said he wanted to start a business with the money I'd given him. He brought home plans, full of jargon I didn't understand, and every night he got drunk on whiskey, eyes dull like a stranger. Then, one February morning, just after I made coffee, Ethan laid a pre-printed sheet in front of me. "Mom, starting this month, rent is $4,000. I need clear rules." I froze. "Rent? Ethan, this is our home." "It's my home now," he answered, voice cold. "You signed it over to me, remember? I'm responsible for the bank, and if you stay, you have to contribute." I gripped my hands so tight the coffee cup trembled. I wanted to say I was the one who paid off the loan with Harold's insurance, but I kept quiet. I was afraid of losing my only child, afraid that an argument would shred what little we had left. I signed the paper. My signature shook like the last stroke of my faith. From that day on, I started months of nonstop work. In the morning, I swept floors at a small market on Elm Street. In the afternoon, I cleaned a retired teacher's home. At night, I washed dishes at a diner until midnight. At the end of every month, I put $4,000 in an envelope and set it on the kitchen table. Ethan never said thank you. Once, I found a wine bill in the trash for nearly $500. And me, I cut back on bone medicine and ate instant noodles twice a day just to pay rent. Marissa spoke less and less. She used to be sweet and gentle with me, but after Ethan's outbursts, she only bowed her head and avoided my eyes. I didn't blame her. I knew she was living in fear too. The night the plate broke, I was just clearing the table after dinner. The white porcelain dish with the blue rim had been a wedding gift, the only piece left from the set. I don't know why Ethan called it the most expensive set. Maybe he just needed an excuse to explode. When the shard hit the floor, the sound cracked like a gunshot. Ethan roared, his face flushed. "You broke the most expensive set," Marissa panicked. "Ethan, stop. It's just a plate." "Be quiet," he snapped, eyes sharp as a knife. "She should learn to pay for every mistake." I didn't argue. I knelt, picked up each shard, blood from my hand dotting the floor. Then I stood, pulled the still warm paycheck envelope from my pocket, and set it in front of my son. "This is this month's rent," I said, my voice hoarse. Ethan didn't look at me. He just sipped his drink and smirked. "You should be grateful I let you stay." I looked at the chair where Harold used to sit, now replaced by the shadow of a cold sun. My heart broke again, and this time there was no one left to tape it back together. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed clothes, medicine, and a folder of old documents. In it was the original land title, my name still on it, never transferred. Ethan thought I'd turned everything over to him, but in fact, I had only done a temporary power of attorney arrangement for tax purposes. I set the last envelope of $4,000 on the table next to Harold's photo. "Honey," I whispered, "I can't keep the son we were once so proud of. But don't worry, he'll learn the lesson life hasn't taught him yet." When I stepped out, the night wind swept across the porch, the smell of snow mixed with leftover alcohol. I got into the old Honda, the car Ethan said made the neighborhood look cheap, and turned the key. The headlights cut across the wet road like a sad but necessary exit. Behind me, the house lights were still on, music from the living room playing as if nothing had happened. I drove with no destination. In my bag, the phone buzzed non-stop, 38 missed calls from the same number. I didn't pick up. I didn't want to hear another false apology or order. When the dashboard clock flipped to 2:17 a.m., I pulled into a small roadside motel. The neon sign blinked, "Vacancy," its weak glow wheezing. The clerk looked at me, a 65-year-old woman, soaked, holding a bag and a stack of papers, and silently handed me a key. The room smelled strongly of bleach. Thin blankets scarred walls, but at least no one yelled at me there. I set my bag down, sat on the edge of the bed, turned on the phone, and stared at 38 missed calls and a flood of texts. "Where are you?" I was just angry. "Come back and we'll talk." I powered it off, pulled the battery, and looked out the window. Snow began to fall harder. Each flake landed like the sky's sigh. I pressed my palm over the cut the blood had dried, leaving a raw line. It reminded me every wound has a price, and sometimes silence is the most costly answer. I lay down, my back aching on the sagging mattress, but my heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't hold my breath at the sound of a door opening, didn't brace for insults. Only the steady rain on the eaves and the faint warmth of freedom. Before closing my eyes, I looked at the folder beside me, the bold words, "Deed of Ownership, Nora Whitman," catching the light. I smiled softly. Tomorrow I would call Harold's old attorney. Tomorrow I would reclaim my name not just on paper, but in my life. And Ethan, he would understand, eventually. Not everyone can sell the person who gave them life and walk away without paying. I woke when the sun was already high, light threading through the motel curtain like thin stitches. I'd slept fitfully, dreams tangled with rain and memories of the old house. In the dream, I heard Harold laugh a sound I'd forgotten. He said, "Nora, you were never a burden. You just forgot you have the right to be at peace." I sat up and made a quick cup of instant coffee from the lobby pack. Even cheap coffee still tasted like survival. I opened my bag and took out the land title, the one thing I kept like a charm. The line, "Deed of Ownership, Nora Whitman," was clear and sharp, a reminder I hadn't lost everything. At noon, I drove the Honda out of town along Maple Street, where an old wooden sign read, "Rooms for rent. Quiet neighborhood." I pulled over. Inside, a 2-story brown brick building with a small yard and a few sun-leaning cacti. A middle-aged man came out, tall, a dusting of gray hair, metal frames on his glasses. Plaid shirt, notebook in hand. "I'm Luis Ortega, the landlord. Here to see a room?" I nodded, clutching my bag. "I need a quiet place, preferably long-term." "Second floor, 3B, he said, husky but kind voice. "Nothing fancy, but clean." I don't ask many questions, just pay on time, don't bother neighbors, no old gas stoves. Rent is $950 a month, minimum 6-month lease. Not negotiable. I followed him up the steps. The wooden stairs creaked. The room was small. Floors worn. A crack on the wall ran like a vein of time. But when he opened the window, the light spilled in clear, pale gold, washing over my face. I stood still. I couldn't remember the last time daylight touched me without someone yelling. "How do you like it?" Luis asked, watching carefully. I swallowed. "I'll take it. I can put down the deposit now." He raised an eyebrow, as if unsure a 65-year-old woman with messy gray hair and a worn coat could pay on the spot. Then he nodded and pulled a standard lease from his pocket. "Sign here, Whitman, right?" "Yes," I said, my hand trembling slightly as I took the pen. For the first time in years, I signed my name for myself, not for anyone else, and not as a placeholder. When he handed me the keys, the soft metal clink sounded like a new heartbeat. "Welcome to Maple Street," Luis said. "If you need anything, knock downstairs. I fix pipes and change bulbs for free." I thanked him, and when he left, I sat on the bed. The room had nothing but a thin mattress, a wobbly table, and a window facing a line of bare maples, and yet to me, it felt like a beginning. That afternoon, I drove to the thrift store on the corner of Jefferson. I picked a tulip-shaped desk lamp. Its gold paint was chipped, but when I tested it, the light was warm and soft like an old spring. I added a small pot, 2 bowls, a thin blanket, and a floral curtain that smelled of sun. Total, $42. I set them carefully on the back seat like treasure. Back in the room, the sunset spread amber across the walls. I plugged in the tulip lamp. Its gentle glow filled the space and made the old room look alive. I poured a glass of water, sat on the bed, and listened to the creaks from downstairs. The sound of ordinary life, a sound I'd forgotten. A light knock at the door. A woman around 60, gray hair in a neat bun, held a tray of bread. "I'm Ruthie Park, across the hall." She smiled. "I bake banana bread. When someone new moves in, I bring a loaf. Here, everyone lives on their own, but sometimes a slice of bread makes a person less lonely." I thanked her and invited her in, but she shook her head. "No need, Nora. On Maple Street, we respect space. Live quietly, and don't let anyone make you apologize for wanting peace. That's enough." She left the hallway scented with banana bread and simple kindness. That night I set up the room, made the bed, washed the bowls, put the pot away. Every small task felt like rebuilding a piece of dignity that had been sanded down. When the tulip lamp lit the wall, I opened my old notebook, the one where I used to track Ethan's monthly expenses. Instead of numbers, this time I wrote 5 new rules for living. 1. No borrowing. 2. No begging. 3. No crying. 4. No debt. 5. And no apologizing for wanting peace. I taped the paper to the wall beside the tulip lamp like a vow to myself. The next morning, I made coffee in a little electric kettle. The smell filled the room. No one yelled that it was too strong or too loud too early. I sat by the window. He watched the sun touch the bare maples and felt slow and quiet. For the first time in years, I drank coffee without rushing. My phone lit up. 12 missed calls from Ethan. I hesitated, then opened voicemail. "You owe me this month." "I need money. Where are you?" "You're not allowed to leave like this." I muted the phone and set it face down. The tulip light reflected off the case, making those messages look small and meaningless. I smiled. For the first time in years, I smiled without guilt. That afternoon, I ran a few errands. The clerk at the corner store, a young woman with pink hair, said, "New here? It's safe." "We all take care of ourselves," I said. "Sounds like what I need." Back home, I saw Luis fixing a pipe in the yard. He looked up and smiled. 3B, treating you okay?" "Better than I expected," I said. "The light there makes me feel still alive." He nodded. Light reminds people who they are. I started over in a room like that too. His words kept me quiet for a long time. That evening, I had a small bowl of soup, then washed the dishes. The light on the water rippled like time healing. I opened the window. Cold air slid in, carrying damp earth and jasmine from the yard. I sat at the table and looked around. Every object had a reason to exist. The little pot that cooks just enough for one, the tulip lamp lighting a quiet corner, the old curtain shielding the world. As I reached to turn off the light, a thin strip of hallway glow slipped under the door. Someone slid an envelope onto the floor. I opened it. Rent received. If you need anything, knock. Luis. No chit-chat, no pity, just respect. Sometimes that's the finest kindness. I lay down, but sleep didn't come. Maybe it was too quiet. I wasn't used to it. I could hear the clock ticking, the wind nudging the wall. I got up, opened the small tin box I always kept in my cloth bag. Inside were the last ties to my old life, our wedding photo, Harold's bent gold ring, and the land deed my name on it. I ran a finger over the signature, remembering Ethan's hand signing that rental paper with me, the strong strokes of the boy I'd taught to write. A tear dropped onto the page, and I didn't wipe it. I spoke softly, to myself. This is what I still hold, and I won't let anyone take it again. The tulip lamp's light fell across the paper, the letters gleaming like breath. I folded it, put it back, and locked the box. Outside, the wind whispered through the branches. A cat padded across the eaves, feet light as a secret. I heard myself exhale long, slow, and deep. That night, I didn't dream of Harold or Ethan. I dreamed of a sunlit road with a little sign that read, Maple Street. I walked alone, and for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I never knew silence could bring so much peace. The first mornings on Maple Street drifted by like smoke. I rose early, made coffee, listened to dry maple leaves rustle at the window. No one rushed me, no one complained the coffee smelled too strong. It was just me and enough space to breathe. After 2 weeks, I decided to drop 2 of my jobs. My back's nightly ache reminded me I'm not 20 anymore. I kept only the cleaning work for 2 kind clients, a widowed piano teacher and a young couple with a new baby. They treated me with simple respect. They asked, "Are you tired?" instead of, "When will you be done?" At noon, I got home early and stopped by the little bakery on the corner. They knew my order, black coffee and a slice of banana bread. Each time I walked in, the girl at the counter smiled. "Miss Whitman, another beautiful day?" I smiled back and thought, yes, because no one is there to ruin it. One afternoon I sat by the window, sunlight spilled across the wall, and I wrote a letter by hand. I wrote to Ethan and Marissa in a calm voice, without blame. "If you need to see me, you can meet me only at the Braves, Public Library on Central, on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. for up to 30 minutes. No money talk, no arguing. If you truly want to talk, I will listen. If you just want to demand, let silence answer for me." I folded it, stamped it, and mailed it. Dropping the letter felt like unloading a stone from my chest. From now on, boundaries would be in my handwriting, not someone else's. The next day, Ruthie knocked. She brought 2 small plants, a pot of basil and a tomato seedling. "I think you should grow something," she said. "Plants keep us busy in a healthy way, and they never ask why we're quiet." We went to the little backyard. Ruthie showed me how to dig, set the seedling, and cover it up to halfway up the stem. "Don't be afraid to trim roots," she said. "Cut roots grow stronger." I went still. Her words stitched right through me. I'd spent a lifetime feeding roots for others, my husband, my son, and never learned to cut off the roots draining me. With soil on my hands, I felt a strange ease. The basil's scent in the sun took me back to when I thought caring for someone was the only way to be loved. Now I understood. Sometimes love begins with letting go. Early in the week, Luis knocked, his expression a little grave. "Miss Whitman," he said softly. "This morning a man came asking about the new tenant. Said he was your son. I told him everyone here has privacy. If you want, I can change your locks." I thanked him, my heart pinched. I knew it was Ethan. I could see his restless, sharp edge in my mind. Maybe he still didn't understand I was no longer obliged to answer. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote in bold red, "Anyone coercing an elder financially is committing a crime." Below it, I copied details from the Elder Financial Abuse Act I'd read when I worked at the library. I taped the page beside my 5 new rules. Side by side, they stood like 2 small shields, guarding me from the old world. 2 days later, just after I finished cleaning the retired teacher's place, there was a knock on the door at Maple Street. Luis was talking to 2 uniformed officers. He waved me down. "Miss Whitman?" the taller officer asked politely. "We got a welfare report from your son. He said you might be cognitively impaired and need a wellness check." I stood straight and steady. "Oh? Then please check." I welcomed them into my 2nd-floor room. The tulip lamp lit a tidy table, the tomato plant on the balcony, and a small file cabinet for my papers. I pulled out the signed lease with Luis, then the land title copies. "These are my legal documents," I said evenly. "I live independently, pay rent on time, have a lease, have assets. If anyone reported me incompetent, that report is false." The officers glanced at each other and nodded. The taller one said gently, "Sorry for the trouble, ma'am. You seem more lucid than we are." After they left, Luis chuckled. "Need me to be your witness?" "I've got enough witnesses," I said, pointing to the tulip light washing across the room. Light never lies. That night, I took out the little metal box and started a keep for court file. Each envelope had the date, a description, and proof attached. I saved copies of transfers, bills, and even Ethan's messages. "Mom, I just want to help. Is someone putting ideas in your head? If you don't listen to me, you'll regret it." I printed them, clipped each page, and numbered them. Then I wrote a note. "Silence isn't weakness. It's how I get ready to speak at the right time." I put the file in the drawer and locked it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of something. The next morning, Ruthie came over to water the plants. The smell of basil filled the hallway. "Your plant's doing well," she said. "Just don't overwater it," I laughed. "I'm learning to let it grow on its own." She nodded and stuck a little tag in the pot. "Nora, basil." By afternoon, I made tea and opened the window, listening to distant traffic. The phone rang again. 17 missed calls. I didn't pick up. I switched to silent and set it face down. Outside, the wind shook the leaves. The basil rustled like a whisper from women who used to be told to endure women, who now only want peace. A week passed. I answered none of the messages and picked up none of the calls. Ethan started emailing, "I just want to help, Mom. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. I know apologies from people like him are often the opening move in another round of control. Every morning I went to work, and every night I wrote a short journal. 1 line for the facts, 1 line for feelings. Today's first line, "My son is learning to sit with the silence he created." The second line, "I'm not afraid of the phone ringing anymore." On Sunday, Luis invited Ruthie and me to dinner, pot roast and cornbread. Around the table, he told stories about former tenants. Someone who lost everything in a divorce, someone whose kids drained their savings, someone who just needed a place to sleep in peace. "I used to think older folks only needed love," he said. "Now I see what they need most is the right to be quiet without being treated like something's wrong." I kept silent and nodded. His words echoed in my head all night. Before bed, I opened my notebook and added 1 more line to the paper on the wall. "My silence is my weapon." No hurried footsteps in the hallway, no arguments, no threatening texts. Just my breath, slow and steady. I sat by the window and watched moonlight fall over the little tomato plant. The tender leaves quivered in the breeze, fragile and stubborn. I whispered, not sure if it was to the plant or to myself. No more proving anything. Quiet living is enough. Outside, Maple Street lay still. And I, the woman whose own child charged her rent finally, found a small but mighty kind of power. The right to stay silent. And to let that silence become the strongest voice of my life. 3 weeks after I mailed the letter, I got a short text from Ethan. Fine. Wednesday, 2 p.m. That's it. No apology, no how are you. Like scheduling a meeting. Still, I thanked God he'd at least show up, not for reconciliation, but so I could look straight at the son I once loved blindly. That day, the sky was unusually clear. Sunlight filtered through old maples and fell on the stone steps of the public library. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table by the window, where I could see the lake in the distance. I took the rule card from my bag and set it in the middle. No insults. No money. 30 minutes. Each line was in neat block letters. Steady and sure. At exactly 1:55 p.m., I saw Ethan walk in. He wore a white shirt and dark pants, with Marissa beside him. His face looked thinner. A short beard shadowed his jaw. Even indoors, he kept sunglasses on, maybe to hide the eyes that wouldn't meet mine. Marissa came behind him, arms tight around her bag, shoulders slightly hunched. I stood and gave a small nod. "Sit," I said evenly. Ethan sat and glanced at the paper on the table. "Are you playing lawyer with me now, Mom?" His voice was bitter, edged with sarcasm. I didn't answer right away. I slowly closed my notebook and looked straight at him. "No, I'm doing exactly what you taught me how to make someone pay for their mistakes." The library was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking. Ethan leaned back and folded his arms. "You've got it wrong," he said. "I just want to talk, not fight." "Then talk," I said. "I'm listening." Ethan took off his sunglasses. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep or alcohol, I couldn't tell. "I'm just trying to help you, but you ran off and made people think I'm a monster." "No one thinks you're a monster, Ethan," I said gently. "You chose actions that make people think that." Marissa stayed silent, eyes down. Her fingers clutched the strap of her bag. Ethan shot her a look, his voice dropping, loaded with blame. "See? You did this. You pushed her to leave." Marissa shook her head, whispering, "No, Ethan, be quiet." He snapped, loud enough that a few people turned. I set my hand on the table and kept my voice calm. "Ethan, I left because of you, because I don't recognize you anymore." "No one pushed me." He laughed, a harsh sound with no joy. "I charged you rent, sure, but it was the only way to teach you reality. You can't lean on other people's feelings and responsibilities forever. You need to know the value of money." I looked at the boy who once begged me to take his picture by the Christmas tree, who once held my hand learning to ride a bike, now sitting like a creditor. "The value of money?" I asked softly. "I worked 40 years so you could study, so you could live in the house you call yours. I don't need lessons on money's value." But I did learn something else. When love has a price tag, it isn't love anymore. He went quiet, then scoffed. "You're blaming me so you don't have to admit you're weak." I held his gaze. "Maybe you're right," I said slowly. "I was weak to believe that enough love could stop someone from hurting me." I glanced up at the clock. 2:17 p.m. 13 minutes gone. "We still have 17 if you truly want to talk." Ethan took a breath, his hands shaking. "Mom, I just want you to come back. The house feels empty without you. Marissa misses you too." I looked at Marissa. She didn't speak. I could see the fear in her eyes, not of me, but of her husband. "If you really missed me," I said softly, "you wouldn't have turned the house into a place I had to pay to stay. If you missed me, you wouldn't use insults, call the police, or send threats. You miss a mother you think you own, not the mother who actually exists." Marissa lifted her head, lips trembling. "Mrs. Whitman." I'm sorry. I nodded. You don't owe me an apology. Both of you lived in a house where no one told the truth. Ethan slapped the table. The chair scraped. You can't just leave and play the victim. I've taken care of you for years. I stayed even, never raising my voice. No, Ethan, I took care of you, and you repaid me by turning me into a tenant. The air went heavy. A copier whirred in the distance, then stopped. A child ran past. Rubber soles thudded hollow on the floor. Ethan jumped up and yanked the chair aside, banging it against the wall. Marissa flinched. What do you want? He nearly shouted. You want me on my knees? I sat still. My hands lay flat on the table. My eyes didn't leave his angry face. No, Ethan, I said quietly. I want you to take responsibility for what you've done. He froze for a beat, then shoved the chair away. The crash rippled through the library. Have you ever had to stay calm while a loved one was losing their temper? If you'd like, share a small detail your story might give someone the strength they need today. Marissa scrambled to set it upright, murmuring, I'm sorry, sorry. Ethan turned and walked out, shoulders tight. I stayed put. The librarian glanced at me, worried. I gave a small smile and shook my head. It's okay, I said. I checked the clock. 2:30 p.m. Exactly 30 minutes. I folded the rule card, slid it into my notebook, stood up, and walked out slowly. Outside, the sunlight was still honey gold. I strolled the brick path and breathed deep. By the lake, a few kids fed the ducks. I remembered when Ethan loved that, how he laughed when crumbs stuck to a duck's beak. Now that laugh lived only in memory, out of reach. I sat on a bench and opened my notebook. My hand shook a little, but the letters were clear. I wrote, For the first time, my son was angry, and I wasn't afraid. I paused and looked at the words. Each one felt like a small stitch in an old wound. And for the first time, I understand real strength. It isn't in shouting, it's in staying quiet. Back on Maple Street, Ruthie was watering the porch plants. She saw me and smiled. Did it go okay? He came, then left, I said simply. She nodded and didn't ask more. Your basil has 3 new leaves, she said softly. They know how to stand tall, even after the roots were trimmed. I looked at the pot and saw myself small and steady. Night fell. I sat alone by the window and kept writing. The tulip lamp cast warm gold over the table. My shadow climbed the wall, a thin woman, gray hair, bright eyes. I added one last line for the day. When he threw the chair, I stayed seated. Not because I was scared, but because I'm strong enough not to prove anything. I closed the notebook and set it in the drawer. Outside, Maple Street was still as paper. I heard the wind in the trees and the faint trace of basil in the air. I poured myself a cup of tea. Heat filled my palms. In the mirror, my eyes met my own, no more shaking, no more dodging. I smiled a little. For the first time in years, I knew I'd won, not with words, not with the law, but with calm. 3 days after the library meeting, I thought things would settle. Ethan disappeared from view. Marissa didn't call or text. I told myself maybe he was tired, maybe he'd begun to think. But then, on a gray afternoon in early March, just after I finished cleaning the piano teacher's place, there was a soft knock at my door on Maple Street. When I opened it, a woman around 40 stood there. Wavy brown hair, a long cream coat, polite face with tired eyes. Are you Nora Whitman? She asked, voice low. I am, I said. And you are? She took a long breath. I'm Emily Sutter. You don't. I know me, but I used to date Ethan. Hearing that name Ethan, spoken by someone else, still weighed on my chest. I let her in. The room was full of late afternoon light. Basil from the porch drifted through the window. Emily sat on the edge of the chair, gripping her purse like she was gathering courage. I came because I think you should know, she said quietly. Your son is still doing the same things. The same? I asked carefully. conning relatives, forging signatures. Making debts look legit, she said, then met my eyes. Ethan's working with a man named Victor Hale. He specializes in making debt look legal with family powers of attorney. I kept silent, heart pounding. Those two words, power of attorney, cut like a blade through old memories. I'd signed one for Harold once, so he could make a short-term investment for our future. When it collapsed, I lost nearly all our savings. Harold cried and said it was for the family. I forgave him. And now my son was repeating it. Emily pulled a packet from her bag. You should see this. A photocopy of a pawn slip, with a scrawl under the name Nora Whitman. That handwriting wasn't mine. He used your name to open a secondary line of credit, she said. He used your file as backing for a loan through Victor Hale's pawn shop. I know because I saw the original on Victor's desk. When I asked, he said, Ethan has the right to use that name. I gripped the table. The room spun for a moment. I don't live with him anymore, I said. I didn't sign anything. But in this system, if there's a signature, they believe it. Emily nodded. I know. He used my name once, too. By the time I realized, it was too late. I lost almost $20,000. I looked at her, feeling both pity and fear. Why are you helping me? She pressed her lips together. Because I loved him once. I believed this time will be different. But people like Ethan don't know what different means. They only repeat. I don't want to see you pulled under. I went quiet. The slanting light drew our shadows on the wall, two women from different generations with the same wound. Who did Ethan learn this from? I asked, almost to myself. Emily sighed. Maybe from the person he admired most. I let out a tired laugh. From his father. The words dropped like a small stone, but the echo was loud in my chest. Harold used to say, sometimes you have to bend the rules to survive. Ethan heard that and believed a little bend was a free pass. Emily handed me another sheet, a neat typed list with just a few lines. 4 stages of manipulation. 1. Crisis. 2. Ask for help. 3. Promise. 4. Repeat. This came from a financial fraud support program, she said. Ethan ran all 4 on me. You should be ready. I stared at the page, my hand trembling. Thank you, Emily. No thanks needed, she said. Just don't believe anything he says when he comes back. The more pity you feel, the more you'll lose. She stood, left the papers on the table, and the room fell quiet when the door clicked shut. I sat a long time, looking at the list. Crisis. Help. Promise. Repeat. It was the chorus of my life, only this time I knew the tune by heart. I took photos of every document on my phone and saved them in a folder called Evidence Ethan. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, He doesn't get to be called son when he turns his mother into a loan tool. My pen stopped. I closed my eyes and breathed. I suddenly thought of Ruthie. I stepped outside. She was on the porch trimming basil. Did you know, she said without looking up, if you cut at the right time, the basil smells stronger and lasts longer? I watched her sure hands, the snip of the shears. And if you cut wrong? Then it weakens and slows down, she said. But if you're patient, it comes back, sometimes greener than before. I stayed quiet, following the scent drifting on the breeze. In that moment, I knew it was time for me to cut too. Cut the habit of rescuing. Cut the fantasy that blood alone can save everything. That night, I opened the cabinet, took out the metal box, and added the pawn copy, Emily's list, and a few prints from bank emails to a separate section. I categorized everything carefully, with dates and notes. On the lid, I stuck a new label, KEEPFORCOURT, Financial Evidence. When I pressed it down, my palms were damp, but my heartbeat was slow and steady. I wasn't the woman who shook under her son's yelling anymore. I was turning fear into action. I made tea, sat at the table, and watched the tulip lamp glow on the window. The little room felt like a cocoon, and I liked something about to emerge. Late. The phone lit up. A text from an unknown number. "Mom, I know you met Emily. Don't listen to her. You don't know the whole story." "I'll explain." I set the phone down without answering. A moment later, another message. "I'm just trying to help you get out of debt. Everything I do is for you." I looked at the screen and let out a small laugh. Crisis help promise repeat. The circle had closed. I locked the phone and put it in the drawer. For the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt awake. The next morning, I went over to Ruthie's place. She was turning the soil for a new tomato bed. "I want to plant a few more," I said. "Maybe there's too much ground going unused." She smiled. "Do it. The better the timing of your care, the sweeter the fruit." I rolled up my sleeves and dug alongside her. The mud was ice cold, but it felt real. Every so often, Ruthie glanced up at me. "Got something on your mind?" I just said, "I'm learning how to keep my roots from spreading the wrong way." That afternoon, Luis brought mail up to me. Someone left an envelope, no name. I opened. Inside was another pawn receipt, also in my name, dated more recently. At the bottom, a scrawl, "Please don't make a scene, Mom." I held the paper, and my chest went cold. So Ethan had stepped in deeper than I thought. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote, "My son doesn't need saving anymore. He needs consequences." I looked at my hands, the calluses from work, the small cracks from time. I closed them into a fist. The hand that once raised and fed is now ready to cut to the root. Outside the window, the wind shook the basil leaves, and the scent filled the room sharp and clean. I breathed in, then opened the file box and arranged each piece of evidence in order. When I shut the lid, the metal clicked, dry and final, but to me, it was the sound of waking up. I knew I was entering a new phase, the kind where love steps back and justice takes the lead. And somewhere in the dark, Victor Hale, a man I hadn't met, surely had already heard the name Nora Whitman. On Monday morning, a light rain fell. I was making coffee when I heard a knock. Luis stood outside with a few more envelopes. He handed them to me with a smile. "Bank mail for you. Looks important." I dried my hands and opened one. Inside was a statement and a bold headline that made me go still. "Co-signed loan notice, $42,000 US. Below it, my name, Nora Whitman, and another under co-signer, Ethan Whitman. Filed by Victor Hale. I sat down, my hands cooling. Every printed letter cut like a blade. I had expected something like this, but not this fast. I flipped the page to the signature line. Under authorization of co-borrower was a shaky signature trying to imitate my handwriting. If you weren't careful, you'd think it was the real scrawl of an elderly woman with unsteady hands. I sat very still. Then I took a long breath, folded the letter, and set it neatly on the table. No tears, no rage, only absolute clarity. At noon, I went to the print shop and asked the clerk to make 3 extra copies of the statement and 1 color print. She asked softly, "Want me to highlight the dates?" "All of them," I said. "As clear as possible." After that, I drove to the bank. The service counter smelled like coffee and sanitizer. Keyboards clicked steadily. I explained, my voice even, "I'm the victim of financial fraud. My son used my name to co-sign a $42,000 loan. I did not consent. I'd like to file a fraud report and place an official credit freeze." The banker looked startled, then nodded. "Please fill out this form. We'll process it right away." I filled each box carefully and slowly, like I was writing my freedom back into place. When I reached the witness section, I paused and looked at her. "Can I have a witness sign from outside the bank?" "Of course, as long as they know you personally." I smiled. "I know just the person." That afternoon, I found Luis downstairs painting the fence. Do you have a minute? I asked. Sure. What's going on? I handed him the papers. I need a witness. Just a signature stating I live here, I'm clear-minded, independent, and fully competent. Any signature that appears elsewhere in my name is a forgery. Luis was quiet for a few seconds, then set the paint can down. All right, do you have a pen? I gave him a blue pen. He signed, wrote out Luis Ortega, address and date, then met my eyes. People can fake a signature, but they can't fake the look in someone's eyes when they've been betrayed. I nodded. Thank you. I think this is the first time someone has stood on my side on paper. That evening, I called my sister June in Boston. Her voice shook after I finished. Oh, Nora, I told you to keep everything in your name. I did, I said softly, but he learned how to game the rules just like Harold did. Silence. Then she said, So what are you going to do? I'm going to face them, and I need you with me. I'll come. 3 days later, June arrived at Maple Street. She's 6 years younger than me, slim, with auburn-dyed hair. She used to be impulsive. Now she's the steady one I needed. We drove to my old house, the place I lived for 40 years, now Ethan's. On the way, June said, I've never seen you this calm. How else should I be? I answered. Anger won't make paper speak. But signatures will. When we turned down the familiar street, my chest tightened. The house looked the same, except the lawn was overgrown. The curtains were gray instead of white, and a brass plaque at the gate read, Whitman and Hale Financial Consulting. I let out a long breath. Victor Hale, he had sunk his roots here already. June started to step out, but I held her hand. We'll stay outside, I said. No need to go in. She nodded and leaned against the car. I walked up the steps. Marissa opened the door. She wore a thick sweater, pale face, dark circles under her eyes. Mrs. Whitman, she breathed, voice trembling. I didn't think you'd come. Is he home? She nodded faintly. In the living room, with Mr. Hale. I stepped inside. The place reeked of liquor and smoke. Papers were strewn across the table and a laptop sat open. Ethan was at the head of the table. Next to him sat a man around 50 with slicked hair, a dark suit, and eyes like glass. Had to be Victor Hale. Well, Mrs. Nora Whitman, he smirked, I've heard a lot about you. Please, have a seat. I didn't come to sit, I said evenly. I came to put the truth back on the table. Ethan stood, voice trying to sound gentle. Mom, I can explain. I raised a hand. Don't call me Mom while you're using my name to borrow $42,000. The room froze. Marissa bowed her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Victor leaned on the table, feigning charm. You may be misunderstanding. This is temporary and fully legal. Ethan co-signed. And you, I pulled from my bag the property deed copy and the bank fraud report. This is the only legal ownership I have, I said, laying them down. And this is what I filed at the bank yesterday. I've also frozen my credit. You cannot use my name for any loan, Mr. Hale. Victor stared, a flash of irritation in his eyes. Ethan flushed. Are you threatening to sue me, Mom? I met his gaze, calm. No, Ethan, I'm not threatening. I'm notifying. Victor let out a dry laugh. You're making a big deal of nothing. You'll make people think your son is a criminal. I shrugged. If they think that, maybe it's because he's acting like one. Marissa broke down. Ethan, please, stop, he snapped. Be quiet. Then to me, hard and flat. What do you want? I gathered the papers and put them back in my bag. I want you to understand that everything you're building on lies will collapse. I won't have to lift a finger. I turned to go, feeling Victor's stare slick, cold, inhuman on my back. At the door, I paused and spoke softly but clearly. Remember this, the law may be slow, but it always arrives, and when it does, it doesn't knock. I stepped onto the porch. A light wind moved the dry leaves at my feet. June was still there, watching me with worried, proud eyes. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Okay, more than ever." We got in the car. In the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan at the door, and Victor turning back to the table, his mouth moving. I didn't care anymore. As we left the street, the breeze slipped in through the window with the smell of fresh grass. Trees swayed in the light. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. June said softly, "I've never seen you this strong." I smiled. "It's not strength. It's just, the papers have started speaking for me. I didn't say anything else. The road stretched ahead. The sun was gentle, and I felt like I'd closed a long chapter 1 of fear, guilt, and compliance. I knew after today Victor would try to maneuver, Ethan would justify, but I wasn't the soft mother anymore. I had evidence, a witness, the truth, and most of all, myself. That night back on Maple Street, I made a mug of peppermint tea. A spring breeze nudged the curtains. I opened my notebook and wrote the day's final line, March 10th. The papers have begun to speak, and I at last have found my voice. I shut the notebook and blew out the tulip lamp. Outside, the wind kept moving softly, and for the first time I didn't shake. 3 days after I went to the old house, Ethan started calling non-stop. On Thursday morning, the phone rang for the 20th time. 6 texts stacked up on the screen. "Mom, I just need until Friday." "It's not what you think." Victor's pressuring me. "You have to help me." "I messed up. I've got no one but you now." I sat at the table, coffee gone cold, and read each line like rereading a photocopy of old years. Same words, same tone, only the name of the person he lied about had changed. I opened my notebook and wrote a single flat line. Wednesday, 2 p.m., library. No money. That's all. No explanations. I set the phone face down. I knew anyone who lives on pity always tries one more time. That afternoon, Luis knocked. He held a thick, gold-edged envelope, eyebrow raised. "Mrs. Nora, someone slid this under your door while I was watering. No sender name, but the perfume smells familiar." I took it. One touch and I knew the expensive perfume Marissa liked. Inside was a wad of cash and a shaky note. "I know you need this. Please don't make it hard for me." I was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "Thank you, Luis. But this isn't for me." "What will you do?" "Send it back. Like any debt that doesn't belong to me." I put the money in a new envelope, sealed it, and wrote a line, "This isn't you paying. This is you ransoming your conscience." That evening, I mailed it back to Ethan's address. No further note. Back home, I stood before the little wall board where I'd written my 5 new rules. I took a pen and added a 6th. When someone shows you their math, don't solve it for them. I read the sentence over and over until my chest felt lighter. I had spent a lifetime solving for others, father, husband, son, and I was always the one who lost points. Not anymore. If Ethan created his own equation, he'd have to find his own answer. I started a new, thicker black notebook. I titled it Numbers and Truth. On the first page, I wrote, March 16th, $42,000, actor Ethan Whitman. Financial advisor, Victor Hale. I kept copying details, dates, times, emails, contents, screenshots, statements. Each number was recorded as a witness to the truth, no feelings needed, no anger required. When I finished, I leaned back and watched the tulip lamp glow on the cover. I wasn't afraid of the numbers anymore. They had once been tools to control me: rent, debts of gratitude, figures other people set to make me small. Now, they were on my side. 3 days later, I received a letter from the bank. The envelope was thick, stamped confidential in red. I opened it, my heart slow but steady. Dear Mrs. Whitman, we confirm the opening of a credit fraud investigation regarding the $42,000 transaction. All related loan activity is temporarily suspended. Representative Victor Hale. I folded the letter and placed it carefully into the KEEPFORCOURT file. No need to win fast, I just needed the truth to begin with a legal signature. That evening I checked my email. One new message from a strange address, but I knew the tone at the first line. From v.hale@hconsultfinance.com. Subject: a friendly piece of advice. Body: Mrs. Whitman, I hear you filed a fraud report. A wise move or foolish, depending on your angle. I don't mean to threaten, but I have many ways to make an elderly person look mentally unstable. If you don't want your reputation smeared, withdraw the claim. The door is still open, as long as you behave. I read every word and gave a small laugh. A man who thinks he can destroy someone's name, forgetting that a real reputation doesn't live in a bully's mouth. I took a screenshot and saved it as Threat v. Hale. Then I printed a copy, filed it, and sent another copy to the community lawyer I knew through the Women's Legal Support Group. The note I attached was short. Evidence of a threat from the subject under investigation. I, Nora Whitman, am fully competent and responsible for my actions. Send. One small click, light as a stone, lifted off my chest. The next morning, Ruthie brought over a tomato start. For you, she said with a kind smile. This one's special, plant it 2/3 deep and the roots will spread twice as far. I took it, my fingers brushing the damp soil, and felt myself settle. Why so deep? Because the stem will put out more roots, Ruthie said. The more past you bury, the stronger the plant stands. I looked up at her, my throat tight. I thought, I'm replanting myself too. By evening, I went out back with a small trowel and dug a hole. The little tomato fit in my palm, delicate, sturdy. I buried it more than halfway, tucked the soil in, and watered. The smell of fresh earth mingled with basil, a scent of beginning. When I stood, the breeze lifted my hair. I looked at my hands, once shaking while holding rent envelopes, once trimming roots with Ruthie, now muddy, firm, and strong. I went inside, opened my notebook, and wrote, March 21st, 20 calls, 6 texts, 1 cash envelope, 1 threat email, and I am still silent. Underneath, I added a slanted line, like a private reminder. When a plant starts rooting, it doesn't need anyone to explain why it's growing. That night, I put on soft music and made ginger tea. The tulip lamp washed the room in warm gold. On the table, the KEEPFORCOURT file sat tidy like the journal of someone who has learned not to step back. The phone lit up one more time, the day's last text from Ethan. I don't want you against me. I'll lose everything if you keep this up. I set the phone down and wrote in the margin, You lose everything not when others leave you, but when you lose your character. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Outside, rain slid over the roof, drop after drop, slow and steady, like my heartbeat. I don't know what tomorrow will be, but I know this. Every collapse starts with messages like these. And when the guilty begin to beg, it means the ground under their feet has started to crack. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of young tomatoes and basil. The smell of honest life and of a woman growing roots again from her own pain. On Wednesday afternoon, the air was still, a thin veil of sunlight draped over the city. I reached the library 15 minutes early, not from eagerness, but to steady myself. I chose a seat near the window, where I could see the maples just beginning to blush red with early spring. Light fell over the page in my hands, and the lines seemed to breathe. At exactly 2 o'clock, the chair beside me was still empty. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I was about to close the book when the library door swung open. Ethan walked in. He looked nothing like the last time I saw him. Thinner, hair slick with sweat, dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt. In his hands was an old baseball cap, crushed out of shape. He glanced around, saw me, hesitated, then walked over. "Sorry, Mom, I'm late," he said, his voice hoarse. I nodded slightly. "It's fine. 10 minutes isn't something I keep score on with." He pulled out a chair. Sat. Fingers laced, index finger tapping the table. Without looking at me, he spoke softly. "I just need to borrow a little. Some gas money. I'll pay it back. I swear." I looked straight at my son's face, the one that once made me proud, now only tired and bitter. I took a pen and a blank sheet from my bag and placed them in front of him. "Right," I said gently. He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "So you'll help?" "No," I said. "Write a plan, not a loan request. Tell me what you're going to do with your life besides asking." That stopped him cold. Then his face shifted from confusion to anger. "Are you making this hard on me?" He growled, slamming his hand on the table so hard my notebook flipped open. I closed it, my voice steady. "Hard isn't punishment, Ethan. Hard is a lesson. If you dodge the lesson, life will reteach it at a higher price." He clenched his fists, breathing fast, then shot to his feet. "You always think you're right. Always preaching while you have no idea what I'm going through." "Maybe I don't know everything," I said slowly, "but I know one thing. People who take responsibility don't need pity." He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then turned and left without looking back. I remained seated, watching his figure fade past the library's glass door. No pain, no anger. Only a long, empty space, and in that space, I was no longer falling. That night, around 8 p.m., I heard noise in the alley. I pulled the curtain and looked out. Ethan's car idled at the mouth of the lane, headlights on, but he didn't get out. He just sat there, head down, hands gripping the wheel. I didn't go outside. I turned on the tulip lamp and read by the window, like any other night. The warm light spilled onto the glass just enough for him to see me calm, clear, okay. 15 minutes later, the headlights cut. The engine's rough hum faded into the calm, dark. I closed the book and rested my chin on my hand. The light glinting on the page made me think, sometimes the best thing we can do for our children is let them see their mother is fine even if she's not by their side. The next morning, I received an email from the bank. "Dear Mrs. Whitman, the $42,000 loan has been suspended. A formal financial fraud investigation is underway. The broker, Mr. Victor Hale, has been asked to cooperate." I read it 3 times. Not to be sure, but to feel the weight of justice. It isn't loud, not dramatic like in a movie. It arrives as a line of black and white text, yet it lets you finally exhale after months of silence. I printed the letter and taped it to the fridge. Beneath it, I added a line in red pen, "When the mask falls, don't pick it up for them." Below that, I taped an old photo. Me, Ethan at 10, and my husband on a summer trip to Oregon. All 3 of us laughing, sunlight on our shoulders, white shirts bright. I stared at it for a long time. Back then, I thought love could cover every mistake. Now I know, love isn't helping someone put their mask back on. In the afternoon, while I was making tea, Luis brought up the mail. "You've got a letter from Marissa." I was surprised. Marissa, my daughter-in-law who once stayed silent while her husband hurt me, had written by hand. The envelope trembled in my fingers, the ink smudged with tears. "Mrs. Nora, I'm sorry. I don't know where to begin. I was afraid of him, afraid of the anger, the control, and the lies. When you left, I thought you were weak. Turns out you were the only truly strong one. I heard Victor is under investigation. Ethan blames everyone, including me. I don't want to live in that house anymore. I'm leaving and starting over. Thank you for showing me silence isn't always losing. Marissa." I folded the letter and set it on the table. Relief spread through my chest, not triumph, but a blood. Sorrow finally put down. I took a pen and wrote a small note back to her. Marissa, I wish you a true life owing no one, fearing no one. Let the past blow away like dust on the wind. Nora. I slipped it into an envelope and sealed it. For the first time in years, I felt myself forgive without needing to forget. That evening, I opened Numbers and Truth and added a few short lines. March 28th. Ethan came to the library, 10 minutes late. Asked to borrow gas money. I gave a pen. Not money. Left without looking back. Victor under investigation. Marissa leaving the house. At the end I wrote, the price of waking up isn't money, it's the necessary loneliness that buys you freedom. Night fell. I sat by the window, watching the streetlight reflect on the basil leaves outside. I heard insects, the wind, and a soft quiet like an old blanket around me. No one calling, no one begging, no one owed. Only me, a 65-year-old woman learning to live light, honest, and enough. I made a cup of chamomile tea and smiled, remembering what Ruthie said that morning. If you want a plant to thrive, you have to know when to pinch back the branches. Maybe I was doing that with my life, snipping the painful limbs so the rest could live. At 11 p.m., I turned off the tulip lamp. The warm light faded slowly, leaving the room in gentle dark. I lay back and stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe tomorrow I'll wake early, make coffee, and write Ruthie about planting a few more tomatoes. A small beginning, but a real one. And somewhere out there in the dark, I believed Ethan was seeing that last glow from the lamp, not a light to guide him, just a quiet signal. His mother is okay, even if she's not waiting. A knock sounded through the still night. The first 3 taps were light, hesitant, then harder, urgent like a scared heartbeat. I opened my eyes and looked at the clock, 5:10 a.m. Outside was still dark, the path misted over. I threw on a thin scarf and stepped out. When the door opened, Ethan stood there. His shirt was damp with sweat, hair wild, face ashen, eyes lost like a child who'd wandered off. I can't control it anymore, Mom, he said, voice catching, breath ragged, shaking like he might fall. I didn't touch him, didn't hug him, didn't ask what happened. I looked straight into those eyes, the same ones that used to laugh when he was little, now 2 dark hollows. Then I spoke, slow and clear. Take the phone, call a rehab center. He lifted his head, lips trembling. I don't have insurance, no money, no one. Then use your real name, I cut in, placing the phone in his hand. And start there. He stared at me, said nothing. Then he bowed to the screen. His fingers shook as he dialed. A receptionist's voice came on, warm, professional, distant. He spoke softly, in broken bits. My name is Ethan Whitman. I need help. I have no insurance, no money, but I need. I stood still and listened to every word. Each one was a brick falling from the wall he'd built between himself and the truth. The call lasted under 3 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at me ashamed and desperate. They said, they can take me this morning, but I don't know how to get there. My car's outside, I said. Let's go. We drove in silence. The road was empty, the amber light stretching ahead like a thin ribbon of hope. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, hands laced, head bowed. I glanced over and remembered him at 16 sitting beside me after passing his college entrance exam, smiling so wide the morning sun looked brighter. Now, in that same seat, sat a man collapsed inside his own life. When we pulled up to Northbridge Recovery, he turned to me. Mom, can you come in with me? I shook my head. No, you have to walk through that door yourself. If I go with you, you'll never learn to stand. He was quiet, eyes lowered. I unlocked the door and nodded at the white building. Go, they're waiting. He hesitated a few seconds, then opened the door. As he walked, he staggered like someone who'd lost his map. I watched until he disappeared inside. A young nurse came out and asked me, Ma'am, Are you the patient's emergency contact? I looked up, my voice light as a breeze. No, put self. He is. She nodded slightly and didn't ask more. I turned away and headed for the car. The morning wind slipped through my shirt, cold to the skin, but I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't have to save anyone. That afternoon, the phone rang. The nurse's voice came through, calm but warm. Mrs. Nora, just letting you know patient Ethan Whitman is demanding to leave. He says he's not used to it and can't stand it. I drew a long breath and closed my eyes. Thank you. But if he leaves, please tell him, don't come to my house. There was a pause on the other end. Then she said softly, I understand. I'll note it. When I hung up, I stood still. Late light fell through the window onto the small wooden table, the same spot where I once set a rent envelope. I remembered how that felt, blood on my hand, emptiness in my chest. Now my hand still trembled, but for something else, letting go. That night the phone rang again. I hesitated, then answered. The same nurse's voice, low but kind. Mrs. Nora, he changed his mind. He's staying. We've scheduled a 30-day program. I was quiet for a few seconds, then managed, Thank you. After I hung up, I sat down and looked through the window where moonlight laid silver over the small pots on the porch. Then my tears fell quiet, light as mist. They dropped into the coffee I'd left half full, mixing into a taste that was bitter and warm. I didn't cry from pity or joy. I cried because maybe, finally, Ethan had hit ground, the place where no one catches you, where it's just you and your consequences. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The air was dewy, but not cold. I stepped onto the porch and made a fresh cup of coffee. Steam rose, sweet and bitter in the same breath. I touched the rim and realized last night's tears still lingered somewhere, blending with the coffee into something hard to name: pain, gentleness, truth. I looked at the tomato plant Ruthie gave me. The leaves had climbed higher, the stem firm, a deep green. I smiled. Some things, planted deep enough, will grow without anyone pulling. After I rinsed the cup, I grabbed a sticky note and added it to the fridge right under, When the mask falls, don't pick it up for them. I wrote, When someone falls, let them hit the ground before they learn to stand. I stepped back and looked at the two lines side by side, one for the people I used to save and one for me. A soft knock sounded. Ruthie came by with a bag of warm banana bread. I hear your son checked in? She asked quietly. Yes, I said. He called himself and signed his own name. She nodded, smiling gently. That's good. People only really change when they see themselves at the bottom. I took the bag. The smell of flour and cinnamon filled the kitchen. I still worry, Ruthie. Mothers never stop, do they? Never, she said, but worry doesn't mean you're chained. It just proves your heart still beats. We sat on the porch, ate bread, watched the morning light spread over the neighbor's roof. There was a strange peace, not because everything was fixed, but because I'd stopped trying to fix it all. That night, when I wrote in my journal, I added, April 2nd, 5:10 a.m. My son knocked on my door. I didn't open my arms, I opened the phone. I didn't rescue, I pointed the way. I paused, then wrote one last line. When someone you love calls himself the one who fell, trust that. At least he's seen the ground. I closed the notebook, stood, and stepped onto the porch. A new moon was up, the sky quiet, only insects singing. I set my hand on the tomato pot and whispered, We're both learning how to stand, aren't we? Then I went back inside and turned off the lights. Darkness filled the small space, but inside me, the light of clarity kept burning. 10 days after the last call from Northbridge, my phone buzzed again. A text at 6 a.m., short, plain, no pleading. I want to stay the full 30 days. Ethan. I stared at the screen for a long time. No more asks for money, no excuses. Just acceptance brief, but enough to tighten my throat. I replied with 4 words. No money, only time. Those 4 words were my way of saying, I can't save you with my wallet, but I can be here with my time and my silence. I set the phone down and opened the curtains. First light slid through the glass and touched the note on the fridge. When someone falls, let them hit the ground. I smiled. Maybe Ethan had hit it, and this time, for real. 2 days later, a thick envelope with a red stamp arrived in the mailbox. I opened it, hands slightly shaking. Dear Mrs. Whitman, after verifying signatures and records, we confirm. The signature in the $42,000 loan bearing the name Nora Whitman is forged. Liability for the loan reverts to the primary responsible party, Mr. Ethan Whitman. The broker, Mr. Victor Hale, is under criminal investigation and all financial activities are suspended. I folded the letter and leaned back. Outside, a breeze lifted the curtain to brush my arm. A pleasant chill ran along my spine, not from weather, but from the feeling of being vindicated. No applause needed, no champion to defend me. Just a piece of paper and a system that can read. 3 days later, Victor vanished. The police called with a few questions, then ended with, he withdrew all funds and isn't at his listed address. But don't worry, the fraud case stands. I simply said, I'm not worried. I just hope that someday he hits the ground too. One afternoon, while I was watering tomatoes on the porch, a car stopped out front. I looked up Ethan. He didn't look as wrecked as that morning. Shirt neat, clean-shaven, still a bit tentative in his steps, but something different in his eyes, the quiet of someone who has weathered a storm. I got a weekend pass, he said, voice steady, neither forced nor begging. I came to bring you this. He opened his hand. In his palm was the key to the old house, a worn silver ring with a small tag that read, Whitman 12. I don't want it anymore, he said. That house, I'm going to sell it. I don't want to live where it's all debt and lies. I looked at the key. For years, I thought it was a symbol of motherly love. Later, it felt like my own shackles. Now resting in my hand, it was light as air. I only said, thank you. Ethan bowed his head, silent for a few seconds, then turned away. As he got into the car, I didn't add anything. I knew that sometimes love doesn't need a hug, it just needs timely silence and a nod. That evening, I set the key on the table beside my tea and the Numbers and Truth notebook. Then I wrote, April 12th. My son returned the key. I took it. Light as wind. Justice arrived. But what I saw more clearly was a person waking up. I closed the notebook, sighed, and turned on the tulip lamp. Its light washed the window frame and caught the dust in the air, the kind of light that makes an old room feel warm. The following week, the city library posted a notice, free class, Managing Finances After Trauma. For those who've experienced scams, financial dependence, or economic abuse. I stood at the bulletin board for a long time. A small group of middle-aged women were reading it too, whispering to each other. I smiled and tore off the little tab. In the corner that said, Register at the main desk. That night I wrote in my notebook, Tomorrow sign up for the class. The next morning, I went to the library. The head librarian, a woman with neatly brushed silver hair, looked at me and said, Mrs. Nora, there's one spot left. If you want, you can take the class, or volunteer to shelve books after. I'll do both, I replied. From that day on, every Thursday afternoon I went to the library and sat among women who'd lived through similar things, some stripped by their children, some controlled by their husbands, some simply learning how to live again. We learned how to read bank statements, fill out tax forms, and say no without feeling guilty. During the break, I shelved books, lining up the spines just so. When my fingers touched the thin dust on the covers, it felt like I was touching my old life, once clinging, once heavy, now just a light layer I could wipe away. One weekend afternoon, Ruthie and Luis called me over to the backyard. "Mrs. Nora, let's make tomato sauce," Ruthie said, holding a basket of ripe tomatoes. "I've got basil," Luis added. "The fragrance is my department." We chopped, simmered, and stirred. The scent of tomatoes, garlic, and basil floated everywhere. The three of us sat on the porch, tasting the sauce with toasted bread. Children's voices drifted over from the neighbors, lively and bright. I looked up at the sky, pale blue, peaceful. Time itself seemed to slow its breathing. Luis took a sip of wine and smiled. "You see, Mrs. Nora, life is this simple, and that's when it tastes best." I nodded. Simple living is the finest luxury. We only need a little so long as that little is real. Ruthie laid a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "You've come a long way. Now you can rest." I smiled at the lines on my hands. No, I'm just beginning a life where I'm in charge. That evening I went home, washed the cups and dishes, made tea, and opened the window. The scent of tomatoes and basil still clung to my hair and clothes. I looked at the old house key on the table. It still lay there, glinting under the light, like a piece of the past rinsed clean. I don't plan to go back, and I don't plan to sell in a hurry. All I know is, it's no longer a shackle. It's proof that even after losing everything, I can live again clean, enough, and free. Night fell, and I wrote the last line in my journal. April 18th, Ethan says he'll finish the 30 days of recovery. I believe it, not because of him, but because the truth has started to take root. I have a home, friends, soil to plant, and time to live. I closed the notebook and looked around the small room, the place that had witnessed tears, fear, and then renewal. Now it held only light. I spoke softly, as if to my own life. "Thank you for giving me a chance to relearn an old lesson that love doesn't mean enduring, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." Outside, the wind mingled with the sound of children laughing under the neighbor's porch. I took a deep breath, dropped my shoulders, and smiled. At last, the true son has appeared, not the Ethan of the past, but the Ethan learning how to be a man. And as for me, a mother, I've finally learned how to be a person, for myself. One early autumn morning, maple leaves started turning gold along Maple Street. When I opened the mailbox, I found a folded envelope, the paper thick, its crease precise. In the top left corner, the familiar hand, slightly slanted, a bit shaky but clear, "Ethan Whitman." I took it inside, set it on the table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and then opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Not long, about half a page, but each word made me pause and breathe. "Mom, I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but I want to start over. I commit. No lying. No borrowing. No using your name for credit. I'll earn my own living and pay down every dollar of my debt. I know you don't need promises, but I need to write this to remind myself. Ethan." I folded the paper, my hand trembling slightly. Morning light crossed the window and touched the words as if to make them brighter. I read it once more and placed it beside numbers and truth. Then I picked up a pen and wrote a short reply. "I accept work, not promises. It's the only way I can love my son now, through reality, not hope." The next afternoon, Ethan called. His voice was low but clear. "I found a job at a repair shop near Northbridge. It's only part-time for now, but I think I can start." I heard tools clacking on the other end, the hum of an engine. He went on, almost shy. "They're letting me learn maintenance. I'm better with my hands than an office." I said, "Good. Just do the real work. No need to rush." "I'll pay the debt little by little," he said. "Not just the bank, what I owe you." I didn't answer. Some debts can't be paid in money, only by living differently. A week later I got another letter, this time from Marissa. A beige envelope, neatly sealed. Her handwriting rounded and light, no longer shaky like before. "Mrs. Nora, thank you for letting me go. I'm living in another city now, working as a server at a small cafe. I reread your letter whenever I feel weak. I think forgiving myself is the hardest part. Wishing peace to you and Ethan. I folded the letter, placed it in a wooden box with the old papers. It felt like a soft breeze through heavy years, closing the door without bitterness. That afternoon, Ethan stopped by. He'd just finished a shift, hands still greasy, shirt smudged. "Mom, I'm sorry I went too far on the phone yesterday," he said, taking a seat. "I just worry I won't make it." I didn't react. I took a pen from my bag and set it on the table in front of him. "If you're worried, write a real plan. I don't hold anyone's fear for them anymore." He looked at me for a few seconds, then nodded. He picked up the pen and started writing slow, but steady. I watched that hand, the one that once signed a fake name, now writing truth. Every stroke felt like a small dot of atonement. That night, I sat at the table and read the page. Ethan wrote that he wants to train formally, earn a technician's certificate, then rent a small apartment near the shop. He'll keep making monthly payments to the bank. No long apologies. "No, I promise. Just a plan." I smiled, tucked the paper into a separate folder, and made a hot cup of tea. The scent of tea blended with the lingering tomato basil from the other night, and the small home smelled gentle. The next day, I decided to buy a real wooden bed. After leaving the old house, I'd been using an air mattress, small, light, easy to fold. It made me feel temporary, like a guest in my own life. But now it was different. I wanted solidity. The delivery man helped assemble the bed while I watched the slats click into place with firm, sure sounds. When he left, I spread a white sheet, set a small pillow, and sat down. The bed didn't creak, it didn't wobble like the old air mattress. For the first time in years, I felt my back supported by something real. That afternoon, Luis came to fix the tulip lamp, the one that's been with me since I moved here. The cord was old, the bulb flickering. He opened the casing and replaced the wire, talking as he worked. "It's not broken, Mrs. Nora. It just needed a new cord. The old one was overloaded, couldn't carry the current." I laughed. "I guess I'm the same." Luis looked up and smiled gently. "Then you're rewiring the heart cord." I said nothing more. I just nodded and watched the new light spill out. Warm, not harsh, just enough to give the room a true glow. That evening I took a small card and added it to the fridge. The words, in black pen, neat and clear. "Love isn't rescue." I looked at the 3 cards stacked together. When the mask falls, don't pick it up. When someone falls, let them hit the ground. Love isn't rescue. Those 3 lines are like 3 rungs of a ladder, carrying me from fear to letting go and then to peace. That autumn night, wind slipped through the window, and the kitchen still held the faint smell of tomato sauce, the scent of something cooked, slow, simple, unpretentious, but true. I sat at the table and switched on the tulip lamp. Its light spread across the wall in soft, honey-colored patches. I opened my journal and wrote, October 2nd. My son wrote a handwritten commitment. I didn't cry, didn't shake. My heart felt still as water, like sauce after a long simmer, no longer boiling, but rich and real. I closed the notebook and looked up at the lamp's glow, warm, soft, covering the room. I realized I don't need anything more. No promises, no witnesses, just true light, real fragrance, and a life stitched back together with a new cord. I turned off the lamp, but the light stayed on inside me, like the tomato sauce scent on my hands, washed clean, yet still faintly there. The fragrance of things that once hurt, but have been cooked down by time. Winter came late that year. On the first morning of light snow, I made a cup of coffee and opened the window. No one yelled, no one told me to shut it so it won't be cold. Just wind moving through a thin curtain, carrying the smell of dried basil hanging on the shelf. The little house on Maple Street was quiet, but not lonely anymore. Ethan is different now. He finished rehab and works full-time at the repair shop. On weekends, he stops by not to ask, but to help. Today he brought a bucket of compost he made himself and said, "For your garden, I think the tomatoes need a boost." Then he bent down and fixed the wooden drawer that had been loose for ages. Neither of us said much. I poured more coffee and set a cup in front of him. The coffee's warmth mingled with the smell of fresh soil and metal, the smell of real things. No more apologies, no more lectures. Just two people repaying each other with honest labor. In the afternoon, after he'd gone, I sat at the table, opened my old notebook, and wrote one line: timeline. The broken plate leaving Maple the library, the center tomato season. A short string of words, yet my whole year, each word a marker, the broken plate the start of the pain. Leaving the first act of freedom. Maple, where I began again. The library where I learned to manage myself. The center where my son began to see light. And tomato season, the season of renewal. I closed the notebook and smiled. Maybe life doesn't need exclamation points, just small dots, linked long enough to make a road. Another afternoon, while I was shelving books at the library, the librarian whispered, "Did you hear? Victor Hale was arrested in another state." I nodded, not happy, not gloating. Just normal, like rain finally falling where it should. Tessa, the woman who used to partner with him, disappeared from view and from our stories. Maybe everyone has to go quiet at some point. A week later, Ethan sent me a handwritten letter. His strokes were steadier than before, like someone who'd learned to stand firm. "Mom, what I owe you isn't money, it's the truth. Thank you for letting me hit the ground so I could learn to stand up on my own. I don't know the future, but I know I'm not going back. Ethan." I read the letter, folded it carefully, and set it beside the old paper I once taped to the fridge. "Keep yourself." Now those 2 pages lay side by side, one from a mother, one from a son, like 2 doors finally opened from the inside. On New Year's morning, I made coffee again, opened a brand new notebook, and wrote the first lines: "Library garden. Soup joy regular. 5 simple words, no big plans, no grand goals. Just the small things that make me want to live one more day. I understand now freedom doesn't need drama. It needs quiet, like the warm breath of coffee in the air, like morning light touching silver hair with no one urging you to smooth it down." I put on my coat and stepped outside. Winter sun glanced off my hair, catching a little shine like fine wire. I walked slowly past the front garden, looking at the tomato plants gone dry, roots still green. I knew when spring came, they'd sprout again. So will I. On the way back, Ruthie called from her porch, "Mrs. Nora, let's make more sauce sometime." Luis just planted more basil. I smiled and nodded. Next week winter needs something red to keep it warm. When I reached my door, I looked up at the noteboard that had hung there all year. It was old now, paper yellowing, corners peeling. I didn't take it down. Every word had become part of me. When the mask falls, don't pick it up. When someone falls, let them hit the ground. Love isn't rescue. 3 lines that taught me how to love, how to let go, how to live. And I know now the door is never opened by someone else. It opens only when you're ready to step through. That night I lit the tulip lamp, the light reflected on the wall, golden as honey. I sat by the window and wrote the last line in the new notebook. "First day of the year I am forgiven, not by anyone else but by myself." I closed the notebook, set down the pen, and let it be. The home smelled faintly of tomatoes. The wind outside mingled with the room's warmth. I closed my eyes, my heart light, not because everything was perfect, but because I no longer feel I have to be. And if you're still here, listening to the very last lines of this story, thank you. Not because you finished it, but because you stayed with yourself. If someday you have to choose between love and peace, I hope you're brave enough to choose peace. Because love can sometimes make us lose our way, while peace will lead us home. I don't know where you're listening from, a far-off city or your own small kitchen, but if you're quietly smiling, leave me one simple line. I'm still here. So I'll know that even when the world is loud, there are souls breathing slowly with me. And if you want to keep going with me to hear more about standing back up, forgiving, and the quiet seasons after the storms, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. So each evening, when I turn on the tulip lamp to tell a story, you'll sit with me again, two old friends, sharing a cup of tea, a deep breath, and a story just long enough to heal. Just as I raise my glass to make a toast at my son's wedding, his father-in-law, Harold Hart, pointed straight at me in front of 200 guests and said loudly, "You are not worthy of being part of my family. Your son is nothing but a parasite." The ballroom fell silent, followed by a few awkward, uncomfortable laughs. I froze where I stood, my hand shaking so much that wine spilled down my dress. But while Harold thought I was weak, he had no idea I was holding something that could destroy his entire life, something I had kept in my purse for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And tonight was that moment. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. I, Marjorie Lane, 67 years old, believed I had lived long enough not to tremble at anyone's cruelty anymore. But when Harold Hart said those words, under the bright gold lights of the Hilton Hotel ballroom and with 200 eyes fixed on me, my heart tightened in a way I hadn't felt in years. My whole life I tried to raise Nathan to be a decent man, respectful, hard-working, building himself from nothing. We were not wealthy, but we were honest. And Harold, with his expensive tuxedo, smug smile, and eyes full of contempt, crushed all of that with a single sentence. I heard silverware stop clinking. A few guests forced awkward smiles to cover their embarrassment. An older woman at the table near mine let out a long sigh, as if witnessing something that should never happen at such a sacred ceremony. But I stayed frozen, feeling only the cold wine seeping into the navy satin dress I was wearing. At that moment, what hurt the most wasn't Harold's words. It was my son's eyes. Nathan stood a few tables away, his face pale, his lips barely moving. "Mom." But before he could come to me, Alyssa, my future daughter-in-law, gripped his hand tightly and shook her head, signaling him to stay silent. His eyes held no anger toward me, only despair. Despair because he was trapped between the two people he loved most and couldn't protect either of us. I looked at Alyssa. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide with fear. Clearly, she hadn't expected her father to behave like that, but her fear wasn't strong enough for her to stand up against him. And Nathan, I knew he would stay silent because he didn't want to add fuel to the fire. Harold kept talking, his voice steady and sharp like a formal accusation. The Hart family has always been made of accomplished, educated people with solid backgrounds, and I want to say this in front of everyone. I hope my daughter is strong enough to lead a man who is still struggling to find his place in society. Find his place in society, he emphasized each word as if hammering it into my son's dignity. I heard a few small laughs, the nasty approval of people who judge worth by money and reputation. I brushed the wine off my dress and lifted my head to look Harold straight in the eye. I smiled, just a small smile, but enough to make him pause for half a second. Just a flicker, but I caught the discomfort in his eyes. Perhaps he thought I would run off, cry, or ruin the wedding, but I didn't. I just stood there smiling as if I were waiting for him to finish, because I truly was waiting for him to step right into the trap I had laid. Not with lies, but with the truth. A truth sharp enough to slice through the armor of reputation he'd worn for years. I tightened my grip on my purse. Inside were envelopes filled with documents, photos, statements, evidence I never wanted to possess, yet had no choice but to keep. Evidence I discovered months ago, starting with a small coincidence that, looking back, I now believe was destiny. Everything began on an April afternoon when I visited Harold and Sharon's home to discuss wedding plans. I arrived earlier than expected, and while I was still near the entrance, I heard Harold's voice coming from his office. His tone was loud, tense, stripped of his usual polished manners. "You need to hide that money. I won't let anyone on the board find out about this. You understand?" I froze, my hand resting lightly on the wooden door frame. I thought I misheard, but then Harold continued, his voice lower but threatening. "And let me be clear. If this gets out, not only will I fall, the entire company will collapse." I stepped back, my heartbeat suddenly fast and uneven. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew it wasn't something innocent, and it definitely wasn't something a respectable man like Harold wanted anyone to overhear. When he walked out, I was already in the living room pretending to admire a painting. Harold's face shifted instantly when he saw me. Then he gave me a smile, the same one I'd seen 100 times, overly confident and perfect to the point of being fake. "Oh, Marjorie, you're early," I replied casually, but inside I knew something was wrong. After that day, the uneasy feeling followed me like a shadow. I paid more attention, I observed more closely, and the more I looked, the more the scattered pieces began to fit into something very dangerous. Sharon always dodged questions about her husband's work. Alyssa avoided talking about their family finances, and Harold constantly bragged about Hart and Sons as if it were an impenetrable fortress. But every fortress has cracks. And I, an old mother with nothing but persistence, decided to find them. I went to see Caleb Morton, a private investigator and former cop in Scottsdale. I had hired him 10 years ago for a family matter, and I knew he never did sloppy work. I still remember the look he gave me when I explained the situation. "You want to investigate your future daughter-in-law's father. I want the truth," I said. "That's all I want." Caleb sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Then let's begin." I never expected that, just a few weeks. Later, Caleb would return with information that kept me awake for many nights. Nights when I lay in my small home, staring at the ceiling like I was staring into a bottomless void. A void where Harold Hart's reputation, wealth, and entire glittering life were collapsing. And I knew I would have to unveil that truth at the right moment. Not to get revenge, but to save my son from a life of humiliation. The same humiliation I had just endured under the ballroom lights of his own wedding. Today, tonight, this moment was where it all began. I always thought of myself as easygoing, not picky, with my son's relationships. Nathan was grown, had a stable job, and could choose for himself. But from the moment he brought Alyssa home for dinner, something inside me shifted. Not because I disliked her. Alyssa was beautiful, soft-spoken, and polite, but because her presence changed the air in my home. Something was too perfect, too shiny, too calculated. That evening, Nathan brought Alyssa over. I made pot roast and toasted bread, his childhood favorites. When I opened the door, Alyssa stood there with a bright smile, holding a bouquet of pale pink tulips, wearing a stylish dress and just enough jewelry to draw attention without overdoing it. "Nathan said you love flowers," she said as she handed me the tulips. I accepted them with thanks, but my eyes quickly dropped to her shoes. expensive designer heels. There's nothing wrong with dressing well, but with Alyssa, everything felt intentional, crafted. Nathan didn't notice at all. He looked at her with bright, excited eyes. The eyes of a man tasting happiness for the first time. I understood. I had once seen that same look in his father, but I also knew that same glow can blind someone to danger. During dinner, Alyssa was sweet, asking about my hobbies, complimenting my kitchen, praising the house decor. But several times when I spoke, she smiled, a polite smile. Yet I had the sense she wasn't really listening. Or maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was too protective of my son. But the feeling grew stronger the night Nathan invited me to dinner at Alyssa's parents' home. The Hart mansion was so large that I felt lost the moment we stepped inside. The front door stood nearly 10 feet tall, the yard perfectly manicured, the floor marble cold beneath my feet. The entryway alone looked like a museum lobby. Harold and Sharon waited at the top of the staircase. Harold in an immaculate suit, grinning wide enough to show every tooth. Sharon in a soft blue dress, smiled gently but avoided my eyes. "Welcome to our home," Harold said, spreading his arms like an MC on stage. Nathan was impressed. Alyssa wrapped her arm around his and smiled, a smile that tightened something in my chest. Dinner was filled with Harold's subtle bragging. He spoke about buying half the mansion in cash, expanding Hart & Sons, his investment portfolio, tax strategies. As if Nathan were sitting through a corporate seminar, Sharon quietly nodded. I listened, silent. At one point, Harold leaned toward me and said, "You know, my family has always protected its reputation. We cannot afford any cracks." He emphasized, "Absolutely cannot." I gave a polite smile, but inside I felt a cold ripple. People terrified of losing reputation usually have something big to hide. Sharon never once met my eyes that night. Alyssa rarely looked comfortable when family finances came up, and the expensive items around the house looked unused, too new. Everything felt like a stage set. As dinner ended, Harold lifted his glass. "My family has protected our name for generations. I hope this marriage does not disappoint us." I heard it loud and clear, a warning, and in that moment I knew the Hart family was not perfect. They only tried to look perfect, and that kind of perfection always hides something. I left that night with a certainty. Something was very wrong, and if I didn't uncover it soon, my son would be the one paying the price. Dinner with both families, the official meeting, was scheduled a few weeks later. Nathan was excited, convinced this was a step toward unity. I didn't want to dampen his joy, so I agreed, though my heart felt heavier with every passing day. The dinner was hosted at an upscale Italian restaurant, the kind Harold described as worthy of discussing the future. Nathan and I arrived first. I wore a beige sweater with an old blazer that had belonged to my late husband. Nathan complimented me, telling me not to worry, but the moment we stepped inside, my heartbeat quickened. Harold and Sharon arrived next, followed by Alyssa in a red dress that drew every eye in the room. Harold shook Nathan's hand, then shook mine with his typical performative smile. "Well, you look better tonight than the last time," he said, as if it were a compliment, but his tone sounded more like a judgment. I smiled politely. Refusing to react was the only way not to turn this dinner into a battlefield. As we sat down, Harold ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu without even glancing at the price. He told us about his busy day, board meetings, a new project inspection, contract negotiations. I noticed the way he talked about his work. as if the entire world revolved around him alone. Nathan sat up straight, trying to look mature and worthy, but I sensed the tension in his eyes. He knew tonight was going to be a test, and Harold was the examiner. He didn't wait long. The appetizers had barely been served when Harold leaned forward, placed both hands on the table, and stared straight at Nathan. "So, Nathan, I want to know your income." No sugar-coating, no warm-up, just a bare, wallet-stripping question. Nathan froze. Alyssa turned to her father and said softly, "Dad, not now." Harold raised his hand to silence her. "I have the right to know. My daughter is about to marry him. I need to know whether he can provide the life she deserves. We'll build everything together," Nathan said, his voice small but firm. Harold laughed. "Build? You're renting a place. Your income barely covers your rent. What kind of life can you give Alyssa?" The room seemed to dim a little. I saw my son lower his head, his hands clasped together, just like when he was a child, every time he got a bad grade and was afraid I'd be disappointed. Alyssa sat beside him, staring down at her plate, lips pressed tightly together. She didn't defend Nathan, not one word, not even a gentle squeeze of his hand. My chest burned, not from shame, but from love for my child. I rested my hand lightly on Nathan's, then turned to Harold. "I don't think Nathan's job is the most important thing. What matters is that they love each other and respect each other," I said, keeping my voice calm. Harold raised an eyebrow. "Respect? May I be honest, Marjorie? You sound a little, idealistic." I smiled just as lightly as he had mocked me. "And you sound a little, harsh." Harold let out a laugh, one with no warmth at all. "Being harsh means being realistic. Alyssa was raised in a different environment. I don't want her to suffer." I replied, "Who said loving Nathan means suffering?" He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Many people don't realize they're suffering until it's too late. I'm just protecting my daughter." I stayed silent, but inside, everything felt like it was spinning. I was not used to being looked down on by anyone. But what hurt more was watching this man crush my son just to prove he was more powerful. I suddenly remembered what he said at the mansion. "My family's reputation cannot afford a single crack." Tonight he was using that reputation to humiliate others, a reputation I was beginning to suspect wasn't real. Nathan tried to salvage the dinner by talking about his job and the projects he was working on, but Harold only nodded indifferently, occasionally hurling sharp questions like tiny needles. "Do you plan to buy a house? How much savings do you have? Do you think you have the backbone to protect a family?" Nathan answered each question quietly, but I could feel the deep hurt behind every word. Alyssa stayed silent. Completely silent. She didn't comfort Nathan, didn't defend him. She looked frozen. Or worse, afraid to go against her father. Dinner dragged on awkwardly. I kept my face composed, but my heart broke a little every time I looked at Nathan. When the main course was served, Harold continued, "You say you love Alyssa, but love isn't enough, Nathan. Not enough." I set my utensils down. "Mr. Hart," I said, my voice so steady even I was surprised. "I understand your worry for your daughter. We all worry for our children, but my son is a decent man, and decency is valuable." Harold smirked. "Decency doesn't buy a good life." I looked straight into his eyes, "but it helps people live a better one." He went silent for a second. Then he let out a half laugh, half sneer. "I hope you truly believe that." I didn't respond because at that moment I understood exactly what kind of man Harold was. Someone who stepped on others so he could see himself as taller. He saw Nathan as a temporary choice, as if my son wasn't worthy of climbing the golden staircase he built around his family. When dinner ended, Nathan walked Alyssa to her car. I stayed behind to get my coat. Harold approached me, keeping just enough distance to avoid seeming impolite. "I didn't say those things to insult you," he said quietly. "I said them as a warning. Your son is not worthy of my daughter." I looked at him for a long time. I wanted to say something sharp, something fierce, but in the end I simply said, "You underestimate people too easily, Harold." He shrugged. "Or you overestimate them." I turned away, but in that moment something cold and determined slid through me. I knew exactly what I needed to do. That night when Nathan drove me home, he spoke very little. I knew he was ashamed, hurt, feeling small under that man's judgment. I placed my hand gently on his shoulder, afraid of hurting him more. "You don't need to prove anything to him," I said. "You just need to live true to yourself." Nathan nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully hear me. He hadn't lost to Harold tonight. He had lost to his own fear. When he drove away, I stood on the porch watching the taillights disappear, and I whispered, "You are not walking into a marriage of humiliation. I promise you that." But promises weren't enough. I needed truth. I needed proof of who Harold really was. I needed something Nathan couldn't ignore. From that night on, I wrote down every expression, every comment, every glance Harold made. Every small detail could become a puzzle piece, and the more I recorded, the more cracks I saw in the perfect, wealthy story he had built. What I didn't know yet was that those cracks would lead to a massive secret, one that would tear the Hart family apart on the very day they thought their power was untouchable. In the days after that disastrous dinner, a dull feeling pulsed inside me like a tiny needle pressing into the palm, light but persistent, impossible to ignore. I tried to stay normal around Nathan, not wanting to add pressure, but the image of Harold, his cold eyes, his cutting words, replayed endlessly. A man like that could not be as flawless as the mask he wore. And then, one Friday afternoon, as I parked near the North Scottsdale shopping center to buy baking supplies, I happened to see something I still believe fate placed in front of me. Harold's glossy black SUV was parked in a far corner of the lot, where few cars passed. I recognized the license plate immediately. I'd seen it enough times at the Hart mansion. At first, I thought he was just shopping. But when he stepped out, something was off. He no longer wore his usual smug expression. He kept looking around nervously, as if afraid someone was watching. I leaned slightly in my seat, staying hidden. A minute later, a young woman, maybe in her early 30s, walked toward him. She was naturally beautiful, simply dressed. Beside her were two children, a boy around 8 and a girl around 6, and both children called Harold Dad. I felt my heart drop to the floor of the car. The little girl ran to him, hugging his leg. Harold bent down, stroked her hair with the same hand that had once shaken mine with arrogance. The young woman smiled anxiously and said something quietly. Harold pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. They exchanged hushed words, their eyes darting around. Just watching them, I knew they weren't distant relatives. I didn't have experience with other people's family drama, but I had lived long enough to recognize what I was looking at. This was not a coincidence. This was a family. When Harold turned and accidentally spotted me, his face drained of color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He shoved the children into the SUV.
almost too quickly, urged the woman into the front seat, and within seconds the car peeled away, tires almost lifting dust off the pavement. I stood still for a long time, chest tight with anger. How rotten could a man be? How far could someone go with lies just to look respectable? When I finally entered the store, my hands still trembled. That evening, I called Alyssa. I didn't want to confront her. Not yet, but I wanted to hear her reaction. She sounded cheerful at first, but when I casually mentioned Harold and asked what he'd been doing that afternoon, she fell silent. Oh, he must have seen, a cousin, Alyssa said, her voice shaking so noticeably I heard it even through the phone. One of his cousins just came back to town. I closed my eyes. The first lie someone tells when they're cornered is always the worst. I didn't push her. I thanked her and ended the call. But from that moment on, I knew I had stepped into a secret too big for their family to hide behind silence. That night, I opened my late husband's old notebook, the one he used for work, and wrote, day, month, year. Harold Hart has a second family. The next morning, I went to private investigator Caleb Morton's office. Caleb was in his mid-50s, solid build, weathered face, sharp but kind eyes. He had helped me once in a land dispute years ago. He wasn't a man of unnecessary words. When I told him everything, Caleb crossed his arms and listened without interrupting. He only raised his eyebrows when I mentioned the two children calling Harold Dad. I need the truth, I said, fingers entwined, not to destroy Alyssa's life, but to save my son before he gets pulled into a family built on lies. Caleb nodded. I understand. But I want everything to be legal, clear. I want proof, and I want it fast, before the wedding. He opened his notebook and jotted down a few lines. I'll tail him for 2 weeks. His schedule, where he goes, who he meets. If there's something off, you'll know. I exhaled, part of a heavy weight lifting from my chest. Caleb never made empty promises. Those 2 weeks felt like 2 months. I tried to stay normal around Nathan, cooking for him, chatting about his work, and I avoided mentioning Alyssa or the Harts. But when he left the house, I would sit by the window, watching the street, a quiet fire burning in me. Harold remained perfect on social media. Sharon kept posting elegant dinners. Alyssa kept smiling every time Nathan brought her to visit. But now, I saw the truth behind the pictures. Some secrets are so big that people must perform a lifelong play to hide them. On day 12, Caleb called. Mrs. Lane, he said, his voice low, I think you should come to the office. I knew that tone. It wasn't good news. When I arrived, Caleb placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were photos of Harold with the woman I had seen, and with the 2 children, photos of them at the park, eating dinner, walking the kids to school. Not acquaintances, a real family. Caleb flipped to another page. Bank transfers, purchases, tuition payments, all funded from an account tied to Hart & Sons. He's had a second family for 8 years, Caleb said, and he's supporting them entirely with company money. My breath hitched. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Caleb continued. There are unexplained withdrawals from several construction projects. I can't confirm the full legal implications yet, but... He pushed the financial report toward me. The gaps are huge. I opened each page, my hands trembling slightly. The numbers, the shady line items, the strange notes. They all came together into one clear picture. Harold wasn't just deceiving his wife and children. He was deceiving the company, the shareholders, and everyone who believed he was an honest businessman. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the small office spin around me. Are you all right? Caleb asked. I took a deep breath. I'm all right. I was prepared for this. It just still hurts a little. Caleb nodded. I closed the file. Looking at it on the table felt like staring at a fire ant nest. Touch it once, and the whole swarm would come pouring out and tear everything apart. I knew from that moment on, I had stepped into a battle far bigger than anything I ever imagined. But I also knew something else, more clearly than ever. I would not let my son walk into a marriage tied to a family built on lies. Caleb's file sat in front of me the entire evening like a stone pressing against my chest. I read every page, every number, every little scribble he had marked in red. Each line was a blade slicing into the perfect image Harold always tried to present. The same image my son was preparing to step into with blind trust. I had thought Harold having a second family was the lowest form of betrayal. But when Caleb expanded his investigation, I realized I had only seen the tip of a massive iceberg. The next morning, I went back to Caleb's office. As soon as he saw me, he stood, opened a drawer, and took out another thicker stack of documents. "Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice low and heavy, "I'm afraid things are even worse than we expected." I tightened my grip on my purse, my heart pounding. How bad? Caleb didn't answer immediately. He handed me a financial statement covered in numbers. Hart & Sons has hidden debts in the tens of millions of dollars. I almost couldn't believe my ears. But Harold said his company was growing. That's exactly the problem, Caleb cut in. He lied, or more precisely, he's been surviving on layers of forged documents, fake contracts, and highly sophisticated financial manipulation. My legs lost strength as I sank into the chair. Caleb opened page after page. Project accounts drained with no explanation. Funds transferred to a shell company under the young woman's name. The remaining money funneled into high-risk investments to make up the losses, which failed miserably. "Where did he get the money?" I asked, though the answer was already crystal clear. Caleb looked at me with sad eyes. From the low-income housing project, a large portion was siphoned off to support the second family. I inhaled sharply, not from shock, but from pure outrage. I wasn't someone who cried easily, but knowing poor families lost their homes because Harold wanted to live two lives, it hurt in a different way. "What did he do to the project?" I asked. Caleb placed a set of photos in front of me. Unfinished buildings, cracked brick walls, incomplete roofs, pipes propped up temporarily. "They reported 100 completed units," Caleb said. "In reality, they've built fewer than 40, and the quality is terrible." My hands trembled as I turned to the next page. "Fake documents," Caleb continued. "Inflated material costs, contractor swaps for kickbacks. Some workers haven't been paid for months. I met 3 of them. All said Harold threatened to sue them if they spoke up." I leaned back, holding my head with both hands. Each detail was a hammer blow, heavier than the last. "Has anyone tried to sue?" I asked. "Yes," Caleb replied, "but they were intimidated. Harold has cousins in major banks and friends on the city council. He knows exactly who to use to keep mouths shut." I stayed silent. A man with 2 families was bad enough. But a man who stole millions of dollars from housing for the poor, withheld wages from workers, and threatened victims, that was beyond betrayal. That was a crime. Caleb placed one hand gently on the table. "I know what you're thinking." I looked up. "Do you?" He nodded. "You're wondering if you should expose him. You're thinking about Nathan and Alyssa, too." I bit my lip. Alyssa doesn't know about this, does she? I don't believe she knows everything. Maybe a little, but certainly not the full scale. I closed my eyes. Alyssa's face flashed in my mind. The way she sat silent while Nathan was humiliated at dinner, the shaky lie about cousins, her inability to stand up to Harold even once. I didn't hate Alyssa, but I wasn't naive enough to believe she was strong enough to survive the storm that would follow. If this exploded, she would be the first to be swept away. Caleb said, "You should understand, if you bring him down, it won't just be a scandal, it'll blow up across the entire city." I opened my eyes. I don't want revenge, Caleb. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to save my son before he ties his life to a family built on lies. If they marry, Nathan will sink with him. Caleb studied me for a moment, then nodded. Then what you need is timing. I asked softly, "What timing?" The moment when the truth destroys him the most, the moment when the whole world is watching him. I understood immediately. The wedding. The day Harold Hart wanted to flaunt his reputation, his family, his power. The day he believed everything was his. Respect, admiration, control. If the truth came out on that day, it wouldn't just crack his mask. He would destroy himself in front of everyone he sought to impress. I stood, thanked Caleb, and held the file to my chest like a ticking bomb. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone in the old chair by the window, the one my husband used to sit in when he read the newspaper, and watched the streetlights reflect on the grass outside. The cool Arizona night air slipped through the window crack, but I still felt warm. I thought about Nathan, about how he lowered his head before Harold at dinner, about how he wanted to be stronger so he could deserve Alyssa, about the future he was chasing, a future he didn't know was built on deception. I touched the edge of the file. So many numbers, so much evidence, so many voices, enough to destroy Harold and save my son. But I also knew, once I took this step, there would be no turning back. The next day, when Nathan stopped by to grab his suit for a fitting, he wore a smile I hadn't seen since the dinner with the in-laws. "Mom, things are getting better," he said. "Harold, well, Alyssa's dad, seems to be trying to accept me." I looked into his eyes, those hopeful eyes too pure to see what I had seen. "Nathan," I asked softly, "are you truly happy?" He smiled. "I have Alyssa. That's enough." I didn't say another word. I couldn't. If I spoke, I would have had to tell him everything, and the time for that hadn't come. When he drove away, I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered, "My son, I will protect you, even if it means shattering that man's perfect facade." I looked at the file one last time before closing it. That night, I understood one thing clearly. If I wanted to save Nathan, I had to let Harold collapse under the weight of his own secrets. And the wedding would be the place where he would bow before the truth. After that tense dinner with the in-laws, I could feel Nathan slowly drifting away from me. Not because he wanted to, but because something thin and fog-like had formed between us, something Alyssa had woven so softly that Nathan couldn't feel it, but I could see it clearly. Nathan still visited me every week, but instead of stepping inside with his usual warm smile, he now lingered at the doorway, as if weighing something before speaking. His words began to change, sharper, more sensitive, and sometimes hurtful in a way I never imagined he could be. One afternoon, when he came by to pick up a jacket I had washed, his face looked more strained than usual. I invited him in, but he stood in the middle of the living room, hands in his pockets, staring at the carpet as if the words he carried were too heavy. "Mom," he began, quiet but firm, Alyssa said, "You're not happy about her family." I set my teacup down. I had braced myself for this conversation, but when it actually arrived, my chest tightened. "Son," I said gently, "I just want you to be happy." Nathan sighed, then lifted his eyes to mine. "Alyssa said you're jealous." My heart sank, not because of the accusation, but because Nathan believed it enough to repeat it. "Jealous of what?" I asked calmly. "Jealous that her family is wealthier, that they have more." He paused, then added, "Alyssa said you don't like her because she comes from a better background." I let out a faint laugh, not of amusement, but of disbelief that such an idea could exist. "Nathan," I said, "I've lived long enough to know what's worth envying and what isn't. A wealthy family isn't on my list." But Nathan shook his head, as if my words couldn't reach him. "Then why do you always get upset when Harold is mentioned?" he asked. I wanted to say, "Because Harold is a liar, a betrayer, and a dangerous man." I wanted to open the safe, pull out every document and photo Caleb had collected, but I couldn't. Not then. Not before the right moment. "Because I'm afraid someone will hurt you," I said instead. Nathan looked at me. For a brief second, tenderness flickered in his eyes, but it disappeared quickly, replaced by the unfamiliar coldness I had been seeing lately. "Alyssa said you don't respect her dad," he continued. "She said you look down on his success." I stayed silent. "And isn't that true?" Nathan's voice trembled slightly. Maybe he didn't want to say it, but he did. I didn't feel angry, just deeply hurt, the kind of hurt that sinks through bone. When your child begins to see you through someone else's eyes, you finally understand what it means to lose a child without anyone stealing them from you. I stood, placed my hand on Nathan's shoulder. "Son," I said slowly, "I don't look down on anyone, but I have eyes. I see things you don't yet see. I just want you to think carefully about this marriage." He gently brushed my hand off his shoulder instinctively. "Mom, can't you just accept Alyssa?" I swallowed the ache in my throat. "I can accept anyone who makes you happy," I said, "as long as they treat you well, as long as their family doesn't make you feel small." Nathan frowned. "That's your view, Mom, not mine." I didn't respond, because I knew the more I spoke, the more he would think I was against Alyssa. And that was the last thing I wanted before the truth came out. When Nathan left, I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the tree-lined street. I placed a hand over my heart, feeling it race with fear. Fear of losing him. Fear that the truth would come too late. Fear that he saw me as controlling or selfish. Fear that he would marry into an illusion and one day pay for it with his whole life. Sometimes motherhood isn't pulling your child into your arms. It's watching them walk toward a mistake and waiting for the exact moment to pull them back before they fall off a cliff. That night, I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and took out the small safe I kept under the spare blanket. I placed it on the bed and slowly unlocked it. Inside were the 3 brown envelopes I had been preparing for days. One envelope had Nathan's name on it. One envelope had Alyssa's name. One envelope had Sharon Hart's. Each envelope was thick with papers, photos, financial records, and construction reports Caleb had quietly collected. I had printed every document, labeled each page clearly. Everything inside was the truth. The truth Harold had been hiding behind layers of power and money. I touched the envelope with my son's name a little longer. Inside, it was everything he needed to know so he wouldn't be buried under the rubble Harold was building with his dirty hands. I wanted to tell him right away, but I knew if I gave him this envelope too early, he would think I was trying to ruin the wedding. If I gave it too late, his life could be crushed. The right timing. That was what Caleb reminded me. The right timing. That was what I repeated to myself every day. A few days later, Alyssa texted me, "I hope you understand I never meant to make Nathan drift away from you." I stared at that sentence and felt my heart turn cold, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. Alyssa didn't want a war, but she wanted Nathan to belong to her family, entirely, without ties, and Harold wanted that too. That was when I understood the real meaning of the fear of losing a child. It's not someone ripping your child from your arms. It's when they make your child believe another embrace is softer, safer. I folded my phone shut and breathed deeply. I couldn't blame Alyssa completely. She grew up in a world where family prestige mattered more than truth. Love was often defined by how well you obeyed. And Harold, he had taught her that. And Nathan? He loved. He was blind. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted to be a good man in Alyssa's eyes. But to do that, he was unknowingly drifting further and further away from me. I reminded myself, wait, Marjorie, wait for the right moment. The night before the wedding rehearsal, I opened the safe again. I took out the 3 envelopes and checked them one last time. Photos of Harold holding the 2 children. Video of Harold transferring money into the shell company account. Fake financial reports. The list of underpaid workers. Photos of the unfinished low-income units that were reported as completed. I organized everything neatly and put it back into the safe. I knew. One day soon, Harold would have to face all of this in front of his own family, and no one would be able to save him from the truth. I closed the safe, pushed it deep under the closet shelf, and covered it with a blanket. I turned off the light and walked into the living room, where the glow from the street lamp stretched my shadow across the floor. I looked at that shadow and whispered, "The wedding won't be peaceful, Harold Hart, and I'll be there. I won't let my son be buried under your fake reputation." I sat down on the chair, stretched my arms, and exhaled slowly. Outside, the night wind rustled through the old oak trees in the yard. It was a quiet evening, but inside me, a storm waited for its hour to rise. I prepared myself for everything, for the collapse, for the tears, for the anger, for the panic, for even the bitter laugh Harold wouldn't be able to force out once his mask fell. I wasn't seeking victory. I wasn't seeking revenge. I only wanted one thing, to save my son, before it was too late. Nathan visited me on the afternoon before the wedding. I had just put a batch of pastries in the oven when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was my son's smile, a smile so wide it felt like it lit up the hallway. Nathan wore a white shirt, khaki pants, his hair neatly trimmed, and his eyes glowing with a pure happiness I hadn't seen in a long time. "Mom," Nathan said, opening his arms and hugging me, "tomorrow will be the best day of my life." I hugged him back, but my hands trembled. I tried to keep my voice steady as I said, "I'm happy for you, Nathan." But my heart felt squeezed tight, because I knew what Nathan didn't. I knew the truth, the kind of truth that would break him if he learned it tonight. Nathan walked into the kitchen, sat down, and took a deep breath as if he needed courage to say something. "Mom," he said, "I want you to really be happy for me. I want tomorrow to be perfect." I opened the oven and set the tray of pastries on the counter to cool. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the kitchen. The scent of his childhood, of Christmas mornings, of school days when I woke early to bake for him. "I always want you to be whole," I said. "But son, marriage isn't just love. It's family, and you should think carefully about the family you're walking into." I didn't say it to ruin his wedding. I said it because I was his mother. I said it because my heart hurt too much not to. Nathan leaned back in his chair, hands rubbing his temples. "Mom, you're starting again," he muttered. "Again with the Hart family." I turned around and looked right into his eyes. The eyes I once wiped tears from, the eyes I watched grow up, the eyes that lit up when he achieved his first dream. "I'm not starting anything," I said softly. "I'm worried." Nathan shook his head, giving a small, strained smile. Not the warm one he arrived with. "What is there to worry about, Mom? I love Alyssa. She loves me. Her family might be a little strict, but that doesn't matter." I asked the question I had carried in my heart for months. "Are you sure they see you as part of their family?" Nathan looked up, his expression briefly annoyed. "You're prejudiced against them." I stood still. I didn't want to argue, not tonight. But that sentence pierced me, not because it was harsh, but because it carried the tone of Harold, and that frightened me more than any of the financial evidence Caleb had uncovered. I walked closer and placed a hand on my son's shoulder. "Nathan," I said slowly, "I'm not prejudiced. I have experience. I have eyes, and I see what you don't yet see." He looked away. When he looked back, there was a layer of defensiveness in his gaze I had never seen before. "You don't know them the way I do," he said. "I spend more time with them than you. They're not as bad as you think. You're just worrying too much." I didn't argue. I didn't say Harold was a liar. I didn't say Hart and Sons was drowning in debt. I didn't say Alyssa was being manipulated by her own father. I didn't say anything I knew, because if I did, tonight would destroy Nathan, not Harold. I simply looked at my son for a long time, so long that he lowered his head slightly, as if he could feel the sadness in my eyes. "Mom," he whispered, I love you, but I also have to live my own life." I nodded. "And I want you to live that life in real happiness, not inside a glossy wrapper someone else created." He sighed again, a long sigh that felt like every cell in his body was being stretched thin. "Tomorrow, just come, okay?" he said. "I want you there." I placed my hand on his cheek. "No matter what happens, I'll always be there. Always." Nathan smiled, a smile that made my heart ache and warm at the same time. Then he left, saying he needed to go help Alyssa with the rehearsal. When the door closed, the house fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that makes your chest shake. I stood leaning against the kitchen counter, both hands over my heart, trying to breathe. Tonight, I knew I wouldn't sleep. When the street lights flicked on, I opened the safe again. The 3 envelopes lay there. 3 truths that would change the fate of the entire Hart family. I placed them on the dining table, turned on the lamp, and began checking each envelope. In Nathan's envelope, photos of Harold holding the 2 children, bank statements showing he funded them with company money, video of him meeting the young woman in the parking lot, reports of the unfinished housing project. In Alyssa's envelope, the truth about the father she idolized, written more gently, with a note telling her she wasn't at fault, but she needed to know who she was defending. In Sharon's envelope, financial documents, proof Harold created a private fund under another woman's name, statements showing he withdrew money from their joint account. I added a few small notes to each file. Short explanations, easy to understand, so no one could misinterpret anything. I made sure everything was clear, organized, and factual. By the time I finished, the clock struck 11 at night. The lamp cast a warm glow on the pages, making them look almost golden. Not because of the light, but because of the weight of the truth inside them. I remembered Caleb's words. To make him expose himself, you need a big stage. And tomorrow, I would have a ballroom of 200 people. Tomorrow, Harold would think he was at the peak of his reputation. Tomorrow, the entire city would be watching the Hart family, and tomorrow the mask he had worn for years would fall. I gathered the envelopes and placed them carefully into my purse. I touched the purse, thinking about how it now carried the fate of so many people, Nathan, Alyssa, and even Sharon. I turned off the lamp, letting the kitchen sink into the gentle darkness of the Arizona night. When I stepped into the living room, I paused at the window, looking at the sky sprinkled with tiny stars. I whispered, almost to myself, "Tomorrow, son, I'll protect you, and no one will stop me." I stood there a little longer, letting my fear and determination blend together. Tomorrow was the wedding, but for me, tomorrow would be a battle. The wedding took place under the bright golden Arizona sun, the kind of sunlight people get used to here, but today it felt harsher than ever. I arrived early, not because I was eager, but because I needed time to breathe and steady myself before facing a family teetering on the edge of a cliff they didn't know they were standing on. The hotel ballroom was decorated beautifully. Crisp white tablecloths, flickering candles, rows of pure white lilies lining the tables. Everything was perfect. Perfect in the exact way Harold always imagined. I sat at my assigned seat at the third table, not too far from the stage, but not close enough to be the center of anything. Nathan appeared soon after, wearing a charcoal gray suit and a navy tie I had given him months ago. His face glowed with excitement, though a hint of nerves lingered. When our eyes met, he smiled. That gentle, honest smile I adored. Good, I thought. My son deserves happiness, but not the kind built on lies. The ceremony passed gently, warmly, almost making me forget everything I had prepared. But that moment didn't last. After Nathan and Alyssa exchanged vows, the wedding music soared through the applause. I tried to stay calm, but my hand quietly gripped the edge of the table. Then came the toasts, the part Harold had rehearsed as if it were a performance. He stepped onto the stage amid applause, his tuxedo sharp, his smile practiced, his eyes full of arrogance. He swirled a champagne glass and looked over the ballroom with triumph. "Many of you here know," Harold began, "that the Hart family has always maintained high standards of honor and class." My heart sank. His voice dripped with poison. "And today," he continued, "I am proud that my daughter is entering a marriage we have carefully considered." I saw Nathan stiffen. Alyssa glanced at her father, confused, but Harold kept going, his tone as sharp as a blade. "To be honest," Harold said, lifting his glass and locking eyes with me as if issuing a challenge, "our family has standards, and Nathan, my new son-in-law, may not fully meet those standards yet." The ballroom fell silent. A few people gave polite, awkward laughs. My hand trembled once again. "Nathan," he said, "you're a good young man. I acknowledge that. But my daughter marrying you is a downgrade." I heard several people around me gasp sharply. Shannon, the bridesmaid, brought her hand to her mouth. Nathan looked as if someone had slapped him across the face. His expression drained, and his lips trembled. I saw his shoulders pull inward, like a child being scolded in front of a classroom. Alyssa turned toward her father, ready to protest, but Harold raised his hand as if forbidding her to say a single word. I felt the blood rush to my face, not because he insulted me, I was used to that, but because he humiliated my son on the most important day of his life. And I knew the time had come. I stood up. No one had time to react. I walked quickly toward the stage, the sound of my heels crisp against the wooden floor, each step pushing me closer to a moment I could never undo. Harold saw me and widened his eyes. "What are you doing?" I yanked the microphone from his hand as the room fell into stunned silence. A few whispers rose. Some people stood halfway from their chairs as if anticipating a scene no one dared imagine. I took a deep breath, and I began. "I'm sorry for interrupting," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding like a drum. "But if Mr. Hart has spoken honestly, then I believe it's time for me to do the same." Harold moved toward me to snatch the microphone back, but the sound technician had already muted his mic. That set him off. He barked, "Turn her mic off! Turn it off!" But no one moved, maybe because they didn't understand what was happening. Or maybe they wanted to see. I reached down to the small handbag sitting on the floor near the stage. I opened it and pulled out the thickest envelope, still sealed with my mark. "I have something here," I said, "a wedding gift for everyone, especially for my son, my future daughter-in-law, and Mrs. Sharon Hart." That name made Sharon lift her head. Even from a distance, I saw her go pale, as though she sensed disaster approaching. I opened the envelope. Inside were the photos Caleb had taken. I held one up toward the projector. "This," I said clearly, "is Harold Hart and his second family." The room erupted with noise. I pressed the remote the technician had slipped into my hand earlier, proof they had been prepared for this moment. The giant screen behind the stage lit up. Photo 1. Harold hugging a little girl with curly hair kissing her forehead. Photo 2. Him standing beside the young woman, his arm wrapped around her waist. Photo 3. The two children clutching his legs, mouths open as they called him Dad. A piercing scream broke out. It was Sharon. She collapsed onto her chair, hands trembling violently, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Alyssa burst into tears, stumbling backward as if the ground had vanished beneath her feet. Nathan stood frozen, his gaze torn apart between pain and disbelief. Harold lunged toward the projector, his face blazing red, shouting, "Stop! Turn it off! Are you all insane?" But the technicians, two young men who had likely endured Harold's barking during the rehearsal, didn't move. One exhaled and whispered, "Sorry, Mr. Hart. This is a valid request." Harold roared, "Valid! This is my daughter's wedding. You—" I continued, my voice steady and strong. "And here are the withdrawal records." The receipts appeared on the screen. Detailed transfers, the shell company account, secret payments for Family M, the young woman's name. Then, the video of Harold meeting the woman in the parking lot, him bending down to lift the child, him glancing around nervously, him kissing the child's hair. The ballroom froze. No one laughed. No one breathed loudly. Everyone simply stared at Harold, at the truth, at the falling mask. Harold spiraled into panic. He rushed at me and ripped the microphone from my hand, but instead of speaking, he only opened his mouth silently. His lips trembled, his eyes bulged, his hair was disheveled, and his breathing came in ragged bursts. I could see the chaos inside him, the chaos of a man who knew he had been cornered. I Harold stammered. I'm being framed. This is slander. But no one spoke in his defense. No one believed him. No one took his side. Alyssa sobbed and ran toward Nathan, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a whirlpool. Nathan, still shattered, held her out of instinct. Sharon collapsed onto the floor, her trembling hands gripping the table. A few people rushed to lift her, but her head kept shaking as if she couldn't accept the reality. The ballroom descended into chaos. Some people screamed. Some recorded on their phones. Some sprinted for the exits. Some stood frozen like stone statues. The clatter of falling glasses, scraping chairs, hurried footsteps, and sobs blended into a storm of sound, unlike anything I had heard at a celebration. But through it all, I stood still. Not because I was calm, but because I had been preparing for this moment for a very long time. The moment truth sliced through Harold Hart's golden mask. The moment he couldn't hide behind money, power, or his voice. The moment everyone in the ballroom saw him exactly as he was. A liar, a hypocrite, and a cruel man. And finally, the moment I could look my son in the eye and say, "Do you see now, Nathan? This is the truth I wanted you to know." Harold left the stage like a man whose world had collapsed beneath him. He stumbled between tables, stepping on tablecloths and knocking over a flower vase nearly 3 feet tall. His shouts blended with Alyssa's cries, Sharon's frantic calls, and the murmurs of stunned guests, forming a chaos beyond description. I watched Harold burst through the ballroom doors. 2 security guards tried to stop him, but he shoved them aside and disappeared. Seconds later, I heard camera shutters clicking. Reporters were already waiting in the hallway, as if Harold's downfall had been destined. I stood on the stage, holding the muted microphone. I didn't regret anything, but my heart felt heavy, like a stone sat on it. Not because of Harold, but because of Nathan. When I turned around, I saw my son standing in the middle of the ballroom like a man lost in a blizzard. His face was drained, his lips trembled, and his eyes looked as if something he believed in for months had just died. "Mom." Nathan stepped toward me, his voice trembling. "Why did you do this? Why did you ruin my life?" It felt like someone had sucked the air out of my lungs. Some words, even without malice, cut like knives. This was one of them. I didn't answer immediately. I gently touched his hand, but he pulled away, a reflex that shattered my heart. "Nathan," I whispered, "I didn't ruin your life. I saved it." "That's a lie," Nathan shouted, a cry filled more with despair than anger. "You humiliated my family. You exposed everything in front of everyone. I can't bear this." "You can't bear it because you don't know everything yet." I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope with Nathan's name. "Read it. Read all of it before you blame me." Nathan stood frozen, hesitant to take it, but Alyssa, her face soaked with tears, stepped closer and touched his arm. "Nathan, you should read it." Her voice was so shaky it was almost a whisper. I looked at her. For the first time, her eyes held no trace of the overconfidence typical of the Hart family. Only fear, loss, and realization. Nathan took the envelope with trembling hands. He opened it and pulled out the pages. I watched his eyes shift from surprise to confusion to complete collapse. "Why?" His voice was so faint I had to lean in to hear. "Why did he use my name to withdraw the money?" I swallowed the bitter knot in my throat. Harold, eager to build the image of the wonderful father, had made Nathan sign a series of symbolic forms, which Nathan believed were nothing more than routine paperwork. But in Caleb's files, those signatures had been used by Harold to legitimize several suspicious expenses. "Nathan," I said as gently as possible, "he didn't ask for your signature because he trusted you. He needed you as cover." Nathan dropped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. Alyssa knelt beside him. I didn't know anything. If I had known..." I placed my hand on her shoulder, something I never imagined myself doing a few weeks ago. "You're a victim too, Alyssa," she cried harder. Meanwhile, Sharon was carried out of the room, but she hadn't lost consciousness. Her eyes remained open, watching me through her tears. When I approached, she reached out and gripped my hand. "Thank you," Sharon whispered. "Thank you for saving my children and me." Her voice was barely there, but the gratitude in it was heavy. I squeezed her hand gently, saying nothing, because no words could ease what she was going through. Reporters flooded into the ballroom. Headlines flashed on guests' phone screens. "Powerful businessman Harold Hart flees daughter's wedding." Leaked photos. Does Hart have a second family? Financial misconduct suspected at Hart & Sons. And I knew, in less than 24 hours, the entire city of Scottsdale would be talking about this. In less than 48 hours, all of Arizona would know. And in less than 72 hours, the Hart family would fall. Nathan stayed seated, silent like the shadow of himself. I sat beside him, not touching him, just close enough so he knew I was there. "Nathan," I said, "I know this is unbearable, but you must understand, I didn't do this to beat anyone. I did this so you wouldn't get pulled into Harold's crimes." "He used me," Nathan said, his voice cracked. "He wanted me to be his shield." I nodded. "Because you're the only decent person in that family." Nathan broke down crying, the quiet, painful cry of a grown man whose heart had cracked open. I pulled my son into my arms, letting him cry the way he once did when he fell off his bike in the front yard. "I have nothing left," he whispered. "That's not true." I held his face in my hands. "You have me, and you have the truth." Alyssa stood, wiping her tears. Her face was pale, but there was a new clarity in her eyes, the kind that only deep pain can create. "Mrs. Lane," she said, "I'm sorry. I thought you hated me. But now I understand you were trying to protect Nathan." I placed my hand on Alyssa's shoulder. "You were never the problem. The fault lies with the man who taught you how to see the world." Alyssa lowered her head. "I don't know what tomorrow will be like, but I do know this. Thank you for showing me the truth before it was too late." That night, the police went to Harold's house. They didn't arrest him, not yet, but they seized several documents. I knew because Caleb messaged me a little after 11 p.m. "The evidence you provided has reached the right people. The formal investigation has begun." The next morning, the news published. Harold Hart under investigation for financial fraud, embezzlement, forged records, and misuse of social project funds. By noon, 3 investors of Hart & Sons filed lawsuits. By late afternoon, a group of workers gathered in front of the company demanding their wages. And by the morning of the 3rd day, exactly 72 hours after the ruined wedding, the Hart & Sons headquarters building was officially sealed for investigation. The Hart family, once a symbol of Scottsdale's elite, became the center of the biggest scandal of the decade. Someone called me and asked if I felt satisfied. I simply answered, "No, I just feel relieved because the truth finally has its proper name." Nathan stayed at my house for 3 days straight, spending most of the time quietly lying in his room, holding on to his new reality. But each day he came out with less redness in his eyes and less trembling in his shoulders. Alyssa texted. Sharon sent her thanks. Many guests from the wedding called to apologize for laughing along with Harold. But to me, none of that mattered. The most important thing was that my son had escaped a path that would have dragged him into a bottomless pit. And I had kept my promise, a promise only a mother could fully understand. I will save you, even if I have to stand against the whole world. 3 days after the storm named Harold Hart, Nathan shut the door to the room in my house and only came out when he needed water. I didn't knock, didn't push, didn't question him. I had been a mother for more than 40 years, and I knew some pain must break on its own and mend on its own. No one else can touch it. But on the morning of the 4th day, while I was slicing apples in the kitchen, I heard hurried footsteps. I turned around and Nathan ran in and hugged me tightly, so tightly that I had to set the knife down and steady myself by holding his shoulders. "Mom?" His voice cracked right into my chest. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." I felt his whole body tremble, not from cold, but because he had finally let all his defenses fall. I placed my hand on his cheek, stroking it the way I used to when he was little, then pulled him into my arms. "You don't need to apologize," I whispered. "You just need to come back to yourself." Nathan stepped back slightly and wiped his tears with his sleeve. His eyes, for the first time in days, held a bit of light again. "I got swept up in their glamour, Mom. I kept thinking, that was the dream. That was the success I wanted to build." He paused for a moment, then sighed, as if he had just confessed the hardest truth. "But really, I felt like they were trying to reshape me to fit into their mold." I held his hand tightly. "You weren't wrong for loving. You were only wrong if you thought you had to lose yourself to be loved." Nathan bowed his head and slowly nodded. The next day, I received a message from Alyssa. Not long, not dramatic. "Mrs. Lane, if you don't mind, I'd like to meet you this afternoon." I agreed. We met at a small cafe on a corner of Camelback Road, where sunlight streamed through the windows, laying warm golden strips across the wooden tables. Alyssa arrived in a beige knit coat, her hair tied neatly, her face pale but without the arrogance she once carried. She sat across from me, her fingers intertwined, her gaze lowered as if she didn't yet have the courage to look at me directly. "How is your mother?" I asked. "My mom is still shocked," Alyssa answered, "but she's stronger than I thought." She said, "Maybe this is the best thing that's ever happened to me." I gave a small smile. Sharon, the woman who had always bowed under Harold's shadow, had finally stepped out of the invisible cage he built around her. Alyssa continued, "I'm sorry for ever thinking you disliked me. I didn't understand anything. I thought you just judged my family for not being good enough for Nathan." "Alyssa," I placed my hand over hers, "you were never the one I disliked. What I disliked was the lying." Alyssa nodded slightly, her eyes reddening. "I'm looking for a job now, any job. I don't want to live off my dad's money anymore, and I know things will be hard." "Hard is the right path," I said, "but you won't walk it alone." She looked up at me, startled. "Why would you help me after everything?" I smiled, the smile of a mother who has lived long enough to understand people. "Because you were deceived too. Because you also lost something. And most importantly, because you love Nathan, not the Hart name." Alyssa lowered her head as tears rolled down her cheeks. That evening, I told Nathan, not to pressure him into any decision with Alyssa, but so he could understand that truth always has more sides than the pain he was carrying. Nathan sat on the sofa, his fingers interlocked, thinking for a long time. "I still love Alyssa," he said slowly, "but I'm afraid going back now would throw us right back into the same cycle." I nodded. "You're right. Both of you need time. I want to start over, not as husband and wife, but as two people trying to heal." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Then you're already more mature than you were before, Nathan." The following weeks passed with a completely new rhythm, a rhythm I never thought I would experience at my age. Nathan woke up earlier, took walks around the neighborhood each morning. When he got back, he often helped me in the kitchen making coffee or preparing a simple breakfast of eggs, toast, and fruit. Alyssa moved in with her mother. They rented a small apartment just enough for 2 bedrooms, not luxurious, but peaceful and far brighter than the shadowed mansion Harold once ruled. She texted me every week, telling me about the job she found at a local clothing shop. Not fancy, but work she earned with her own hands. One afternoon, Alyssa came to my house to bring over some paperwork Nathan had left behind long ago. When I opened the door, she stood there with a soft smile, her face no longer wearing fear. "I want to help you cook dinner." She said it timidly but with determination, like a family. I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, I didn't see her as an extension of the Hart family. I saw her simply as herself. "All right," I said. "I could use an extra pair of hands." We washed vegetables, chopped onions, rinsed chicken, and talked about ordinary things women talk about while cooking. Rising grocery prices, a windy morning, stories of how Nathan was afraid of the dark when he was little. Nathan came home while we were making chicken soup. When he saw Alyssa in the kitchen, he paused. Not the kind of pause that comes from pain. The kind that comes from realizing hope might still exist. "Hey," Nathan said softly. "Hi," Alyssa replied, her hand slightly trembling but her eyes no longer avoiding his. I stood to the side, pretending to fuss with the pot, but my heart warmed. Not because they might get back together. I didn't know and didn't want to force it, but because I saw 2 young people learning how to rise from the wreckage. In late-night conversations, Nathan spoke more about the feeling of being manipulated. He didn't say it with self-blame. He spoke like someone looking directly at a wound so it could finally heal. "I thought I was strong," he said, "but I didn't understand that all I wanted was to feel valued, and Harold knew that." "Knowing you were once weak isn't shameful," I said. "What matters is you stood up." Nathan leaned back against the sofa and closed his eyes. "Mom, without you, I think I would have lost everything." I placed my hand over his. "No, you only lost what you never truly had." One evening near the end of summer, the 3 of us, me, Nathan, and Alyssa, sat down to dinner together. No commitments, no promises, no pressure. Just a simple meal among 3 people trying to heal. I looked at them and realized, family isn't always made of marriage certificates or grand ceremonies. Sometimes family is simply the people who choose to sit together after the storm, even when they're still scared, still hurting, but they choose to stay. I knew the road ahead would be uneven. What happened to Harold the court would handle. What happened to Hart and Sons the investors would pursue. What happened to Nathan and Alyssa, time would decide. But I also knew this: justice sometimes comes at a painful cost, but it is a cost worth paying so the people you love can live truthfully. I stood up to clear the table, watching the 2 young people exchange small conversations, and my heart softened. I had fought. I had lost sleep. I had endured being misunderstood. But in the end, I saved my son. and I found peace again in this home. A peace not perfect, but true. A new beginning. Slow, humble, but full of hope. I always believed that time doesn't heal everything, but it reveals everything. For Harold Hart, that happened faster than anyone expected. Less than 2 months after the ruined wedding, the official trial began. The news spread across Arizona, showing Harold entering the courthouse in a wrinkled suit, his hair unkempt, his face worn as if he had aged 10 years. I didn't want to watch the whole trial. I already knew exactly what would be presented. As prosecutors listed the charges, I felt like I was hearing Caleb's notes read aloud one by one: embezzling community project funds, creating fake material records, financial fraud, falsifying data, using someone else's identity for unlawful withdrawals. Each accusation sounded like another nail in the coffin of the reputation Harold had built with a polished facade for decades. I looked around the courtroom. Many who once applauded Harold at public events now stared at the floor, unable to look up. Sharon didn't come. Alyssa didn't either. Nathan chose to stay home. Those Harold once threatened, workers, subcontractors, came in large numbers. They wanted to witness the moment the law finally called the truth by its name. Harold sat at the defendant's table, hands clenched together. It was the first time I'd seen him without his usual sense of authority. No sharpness in his eyes, no confident smile, no gold ring he loved to flaunt at gatherings. All that remained was a man being swallowed by the life he created. When the judge read the sentence, I saw Harold lean slightly forward, as if needing something to hold on to so he wouldn't collapse. Defendant Harold Hart is hereby sentenced, with total penalties and custodial time as prescribed by law. The sound of the gavel echoed like a bell closing an era built on lies. Reporters shot up from their seats. Cameras flashed nonstop. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt a heavy sadness. Some people dig their own graves with greed, but the saddest part isn't watching them fall. It's seeing the innocent get pulled down with them. A few days later, the prison clerk called me. "Mrs. Lane, Mrs. Hart. Oh, I mean, Mrs. Lane, the inmate Harold Hart is requesting to meet you." I hesitated. Since the wedding, I never imagined seeing him again. But I also knew nothing truly ends until the last questions are spoken. "I'll come," I said, "but I won't stay long." That afternoon, the Scottsdale wind was strong. I walked into the visitation room, surrounded by cold gray walls, the dim yellow lights making everything look tired and faded. When Harold was brought in, I went silent for a few seconds. The man in front of me was no longer the Harold Hart I once knew. The man who walked with elite confidence, wore watches worth thousands, and held his head high as if the world was beneath his feet. He wore an orange prison uniform and his hands still trembled slightly. When he saw me, Harold paused and lowered his head, something I never thought I would witness. "Mrs. Lane," he said, his voice hoarse and broken, "thank you for coming." I sat down and placed my handbag beside me. "I only have 15 minutes. Harold gave a faint, sad smile. "I won't keep you long." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once signed countless contracts and directed hundreds of employees, now trembling, frail like those of a sick old man. "Why did you do it?" he asked. No accusation, no anger, just the confusion of someone who no longer had anything to hold on to. I looked at him and answered slowly, "I didn't destroy you, Harold. I only brought the truth to light. You destroyed yourself." Harold closed his eyes for a long moment. His shoulders shook, the first time I had ever seen him cry. Not loud, not like the outburst at the wedding, just slow tears falling, heavy like drops of late regret. "I was too arrogant," he whispered. "I thought I could control everything. I thought reputation was everything." "And you lost everything to protect that," I replied softly. Harold nodded, lifting a hand to cover his face. "I lost 2 children, lost Sharon, lost Alyssa, and the second family, Hart and Sons. Everything." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "But what hurts the most is that I lost myself." I said nothing. Neither of us needed to add more blame. Life had spoken on our behalf. After a long while, he looked up at me, his eyes swollen and red. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. "I don't hate you, Harold. I'm only sad that greed turned you into someone you were never meant to become." He let out a crooked smile, then said, "If I hadn't met you that day, maybe I never would have been exposed." "I'm not the problem," I answered. "The problem is you lived too long on a lie." Harold nodded, as if he finally accepted what the rest of the world had realized long before him. When the prison officer stepped in to announce that time was up, Harold tried to speak quickly. "Mrs. Lane, if you ever see Nathan and Alyssa, tell them I'm sorry." I stood up and picked up my handbag. "I'll tell them," I said, "but whether they forgive you, that's their choice." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the ruin Harold had caused himself one more time. That was the last time in my life I ever saw him. When I stepped out of the prison building, the evening wind blew hard. The sky was strangely clear, as if the storm named Harold Hart had finally blown out of my life and out of the lives of those I loved. I stood on the steps and took a long breath. Not a breath of victory, but a breath of closure. A chapter had ended, a lesson had been completed, and justice, even painful justice, had finally been carried out. I walked toward the parking lot, the late afternoon sunlight warming my shoulders like a reminder. Truth always arrives, late or painful, but it comes to free the people who need to be freed, and I knew I had done the right thing. A year after Harold was sentenced, our lives had shifted into a different rhythm. Slower, steadier, and peaceful in a way I never believed I could have again. Scottsdale was still sunny, still full of desert winds in the evenings, but inside my small family, a new season had begun. Nathan and Alyssa decided to have a new wedding, not to compensate for the collapse of the first one, but to mark a true beginning, one not built on status, money, or empty praise. They chose a small church on the outskirts of town with light brown wooden beams and stained glass windows. It was the place where, the previous fall, Alyssa had spent hours sitting in silence, searching for her peace. This wedding didn't have 200 guests, no champagne poured into imported crystal, no arrogant smile from Harold, no judgmental glances from relatives, no whispers from people who only came to see who was richer. They invited only the people who truly mattered, those who stood by them during the hardest times, a few old friends of Nathan's, Alyssa's new co-workers, and the neighbors who supported me from the beginning. I stood inside the church, a light shawl across my shoulders, watching my son walk toward the altar. Nathan wore a simple navy suit, not expensive tailoring, but his eyes shone brighter than any gemstone. Alyssa followed behind, her white dress gentle as the breeze, her smile trembling yet innocent. No boasting, no insults, no looks of judgment, only love, pure and full. When they exchanged vows again, I felt each word sink deep into my heart. The first time they vowed before a world built on pretenses. This time, they vowed before their true selves. I stood nearby, quietly tearing up. For the first time in more than 2 years, I felt I had truly done the right thing. Right from the beginning, right in the deepest sense, right in a way that freed my heart. After the ceremony, we held a small outdoor reception behind the church. Just a few wooden tables, wild flowers in glass jars, a homemade wedding cake. Not grand, but beautiful in a way only sincerity can be. Alyssa held my hand and whispered, "Mrs. Lane, without you, I don't think I ever could have escaped that life." I gently patted the back of her hand. "No, you freed yourself. I only opened a door. You walked through it." Nathan came over and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Mom," he said, "I used to blame you, but now I'm proud to have a mother as brave as you." I laughed and tapped his arm lightly. "I'm not brave. I'm just a mother who knew her son deserved to live truthfully." Nathan pulled me into a hug, so different from the heavy hug after the storm first passed. This one was a hug of peace, of unconditional love. After the wedding, the three of us gradually settled into a new rhythm. Nathan joined a small but reputable construction company where he was valued for his real abilities. No more tense elite dinners, no more keeping up appearances to please anyone. Alyssa stayed with the job she found at the clothing store. They weren't wealthy, but she had a freedom she had never experienced before. Many evenings we ate together in my little kitchen. Alyssa shared stories about difficult customers. Nathan shared stories about funny coworkers. I listened, sometimes adding old memories, and my heart felt lighter. The things I had always wished for, honesty, peace, love without pretense, finally existed right in front of me. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sipping tea, Nathan suddenly said, "Mom, I think I finally understand what you always taught me. The truth, no matter how harsh, is what frees people." I looked at my son for a long moment. As long as you understand that, it's enough. And I know. Nathan continued, "The real value of a person isn't something anyone can trample on unless we allow it." I held his hand. Exactly. No one can take away your worth, not even those who once thought they had the right. Alyssa placed her hand on top of ours and smiled softly. We all learned that in the hardest way. Over the past year, I saw many people come and go from my life. Some came only to stand with me during a few stormy weeks. Some stayed and became new family. But no matter what, I realized something simple. When you live truthfully, when you refuse to bow to lies, the people who deserve you will find their way to you. I've lived most of my life already, but because of everything that happened, I feel like I just learned a new lesson. One that some people never fully understand. Peace doesn't fall from the sky. It's something you choose. You choose truth. You choose kindness. You choose to stand with what's right. And when you dare to choose, peace will come. As I share this story, I know one thing. You, the person reading or listening, have also faced unfairness at some point. Maybe not from a wealthy in-law family, but from people you loved who didn't understand your worth. If you've ever been looked down on, if you've ever been humiliated, if you've ever been pushed into the shadows because you didn't fit someone else's mold, then remember, your true worth cannot be taken. People can only make you forget it for a while. And once you reclaim it, as I reclaimed it for my son, you enter a whole new chapter of life, a chapter of peace, a chapter of truth, a chapter of your own. Thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. Thank you for giving your time, your heart, and your understanding to this journey. The journey of a mother, a woman growing older but never giving up, And if you are still here, reading these lines, I hope you will stay with me for the next stories I share. Where are you from? Have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up and protect your own worth? Leave a comment. I would love to hear your story. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe so I can continue sharing real-life stories. Stories of ours, of people who may no longer be young, but still have so much to say. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart.